Starting us off in at number 10, he can clone himself. Once upon a time, Superman made a duplicate of himself, and this wasn't even initially a product of the Silver Age. This actually happened in the 90s. And the 60s, which is the Silver Age. Oh, and also the 30s, which is the Golden Age. Okay, let's backtrack for a sec. In 1963, there was a story in which, due to proximity to red kryptonite, Superman was split into two versions, Superman Red and Superman Blue. Now this happened when Superman is hooked up to a brain machine, which accidentally duplicates him. This story was later adapted in 1998 in a storyline called Superman Red and Superman Blue, in which Superman had developed energy-based abilities. Now to be fair, this actually happened before, back in the Golden Age in the live-action Adventures of Superman series, when he split himself in half in order to save himself and Lois from an old collapsed mine shaft that they were stuck in. But still, that was 1938, we can give them some leeway. The 90s though? There's not really an excuse for that, DC. In at number 9, the Superman diet. Oh, the Silver Age. Superman's Silver Age legacy has left us with a bunch of wonderfully dumb comic book covers and plots. Case in point, this issue of Action Comics number 454, in which Superman is shoveling burgers into his mouth while shouting in between bites, "More burgers! Keep them coming or I'll starve to death!" He's also hunched over like he's taking a dump on a camping trip in the forest. It's pretty great. So what exactly is going on here? In multiple iterations of the superhero, the Man of Steel has stated that he receives all the energy he needs from the sun rather than needing food for sustenance. It's thanks to his Kryptonian physiology. But sometimes he eats to fit in, or just because he wants to. And in this case, we see him in need of more energy thanks to Toyman siphoning off his strength. Not only did this weaken Superman, but he felt like he was starving, hence eating all of those burgers as a means of countering Toyman's device. While this power hasn't officially been retconned, it sure has not been revisited. Side note, the cover of this issue also has a burger joint restaurant in the background that has 3 golden arches. In at number 8, phasing through matter. In The Death of Superman, a story arc some of you know I have serious beef with, Superman and Doomsday punch each other to death and a whole ridiculous story arc is spawned from it, inevitably ruining the concept of death in comics. Let's leave it at that for now. Years later, in Superman issue 175, the Man of Steel found himself coming face to face with Doomsday yet again. And what does he do? He phases through Doomsday's punches. Come on, DC! What the hell? Apparently this is a similar ability to what the Flash has, where he moves so fast and vibrates his molecules so that he can phase through objects and individuals. The real kicker though? Superman possessed phasing powers back in 1958 in an episode of Adventures of Superman. Guess DC just ignored that altogether. Guess they can just create powers when necessary and take them away when they want to turn a profit. Sorry, getting a little salty over here. Let's move on to something a little bit more lighthearted. In at number 7, super imagination. Unfortunately, this is not what it sounds like. Super imagination was the name given to an ability of Clark's that was initially called telescopic vision. This occurred thanks to a reprint of a story that appeared in Superman Annual Issue 2. So what exactly is super imagination? It's his ability to look back through time. And his use of it was even more absurd. Superman used his super imagination to send a giant ape named Titano, who shot kryptonite from its eyes back to prehistoric times. He also created special lead sunglasses for the ape so he would stop shooting kryptonite out of his eyes. That was a sentence. Moving on to number 6, telekinesis. During John Byrne's run on Superman, the Man of Steel had a new power added to his roster. Telekinesis, the ability to move things with his mind. Now according to the creator, this enabled Superman's ability to fly. Apparently Superman flying was a form of self-telekinesis in which an invisible force field engulfed him and caused him to float. In addition to this, the telekinesis power also apparently explained his invulnerability, somehow. As if that wasn't bad enough, the concept was adopted by the 1987 film adaptation Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. A telekinetic beam shoots out of the hero's eyes, lifting people off of the ground. He then uses it to repair the Great Wall of China. To be fair, that saga of Superman film adaptations gave him a slew of really odd powers that generally faded into obscurity altogether, so wouldn't think much of it. Moving on to number 5, telepathy. In a 1947 issue of Superman, number 45, Clark finds himself going up against aliens called the Collectors in a story titled The Case of the Living Trophies. Now this alien race's whole shtick is collecting notable people, which apparently includes Lois Lane, so naturally Superman seeks them out and investigates all of their disappearances. He ends up getting captured by the Collectors but uses telepathy in order to force his captor to free him, communicating with this alien without even uttering a word. Apparently this is something all Kryptonians can do, according to the second appearance of this ability in the Lois and Clark television series. Speaking of this wacky comic issue though, that brings us to our next number. And at 4, he can shapeshift. If you thought busting out telepathy powers was something special, hold up, because Superman outdoes himself with another power in that very same issue. After Superman breaks free of his captivity, he shapeshifts into a collector himself, and it's actually really kind of scary how he does it. He impersonates them, tricks the other collectors, and then rescues their human captives and uses a dimension traveling device to return home. How the hell did he shapeshift? Why hasn't he used this power before? And why did he never use it again? Well, I think we can all assume the answer to that last question, since this is the only time he has ever pulled that stunt. Up next, my personal favorite on this list, in at 3, super dancing. Oh. In the 1979 Superman Family issue 196, in a story titled Private Life of Clark Kent Super Disco Fever, Clark is taken to a disco club forcefully by his fan club. It is worth noting that this fan club is a Clark Kent fan club, not a Superman fan club, the product of him being a news anchor at the Daily Planet building for the WGBS TV flagship television station. While judging a dance contest, he discovers that the bar is about to be bombed thanks to his X-ray vision. So what does he do? He decides to bust out some kick-ass disco moves, which vibrates the floor enough to damage the explosive trigger mechanism. The best part is, as he's shaking his booty, which it quite literally says on panel, we get to read his thought bubbles that state, "I saw enough of dancing before to pick up the basics." So apparently this is the first time that Clark has ever done any disco moves, and he's amazing, and the crowd's like, oh my god, and he saves the day. Oh, gotta love the Private Life of Clark Kent stories. So good. Up next at number 2, Mini Superman. Once upon a time, in Superman issue 125, the Man of Steel exhibited a particularly ridiculous and extremely memorable superpower that is so very characteristic of the Silver Age of comic books. In a story titled Superman's New Power, Superman encounters a strange alien ship that explodes on contact with him. His powers are altered, with all but flight and invulnerability removed. All of his other powers are replaced with an ability that lets him shoot out a miniature version of himself, called a Superman proxy, out of his fingers. Thus begins a crazy plot in which Superman starts to use his mini-me to do all of the hard work while he enjoys the perks of being a superhero. If this wasn't silly enough, the story takes it one step further, with Superman actually becoming jealous of his Superman proxy, who was starting to get all of the press attention. What? So what does Superman do? The only thing he can do. He lets the proxy sacrifice itself when a group of criminals try to kill Superman with a chunk of kryptonite. And with his mini-me dead, all of his regular powers return. This was an actual story, published in 1958. And last but not least, in at number 1, the Kryptonian healing coma. I am sorry, I had to. You know how earlier on we mentioned that whole phasing ability that managed to make the absurdity of the Death of Superman arc even totally more absurd? Well, this is how the Death of Superman arc was actually resolved. DC didn't kill off the Man of Steel, rather he just looked dead. Yeah, he had fallen into something coined as a Kryptonian coma, a healing coma that only Kryptonians are capable of, which can nurture them back to health even if they're near death. Of course, this outraged fans, and me, who called DC out on their story arc that clearly was trying to capitalize on hype and turn a profit, and inevitably ruin the concept of death in comic books. I promise I won't rant about it any more than that. In at number 10, manipulation of iron blood content. As much as I adore the original X-Men films from the early 2000s, this power is one that gets a bit of an eye roller. In the second of the series, X2 X-Men United, Sir Ian McKellen's Magneto is locked up in a nifty plastic and glass prison. Since, you know, if it was metal, he would have been out of there ages ago. So in order to orchestrate his big escape, he has Mystique inject a guard who works at the prison with liquid iron. Apparently she injects him with enough of the stuff that when he comes to do his patrol duty over the Master of Magnetism's cell, Eric is able to physically remove that liquid from his body, siphoning it out in order to use it to aid in his flight. It seems a tad silly, doesn't it? According to the comics though, this was actually unnecessary. In Magneto Dark Seduction issue 3, Magneto is able to manipulate the regular levels of iron in the human body body if he focuses hard enough, causing one's blood flow to reverse and immobilize his victims. He uses this little trick on the Avengers, but like a few other numbers on our list, it's a move that makes him unnecessarily overpowered. Dude is already an Omega level mutant with an awesome amount of power. After all, manipulating people's bodies at will is just a tad extra, isn't it? And at number 9, Telepathic Resistance. Considering his biggest foe over the years is the powerful psychic Charles Xavier, this little power of Eric's sure does come in handy, and makes for some interesting story conflict when it's come up in the panels. The reason this lands on our list though is because of the continuity of this power over the years. Sometimes Magneto's telepathic resistance is attributed to his helmet. Other times, it's a resistance that Magneto seemingly has developed naturally. The latter can be seen in the Uncanny X-Men comics. Magneto once meditated so hard that he created a mental block that prevented Emma Frost, another powerful psychic mutant, from reading his mind in close proximity to him. Yet at the same time, Magneto has also proven to be susceptible to some psychic attacks, or at least very powerful ones. After he ripped at the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, Professor X lost it and wiped Magneto's mind, putting him in a coma, which would inevitably lead to the events and creation of Onslaught. And then heroes were born. It was a fun time. Moving on to number 8, he can wield Thors Hammer. Okay, so this one is kind of cheating ever so slightly since it's only a power that he has in the Ultimate Universe on Earth 1610. And technically it might not be so much of a power as it is being worthy, but it kinda seems more like a power. Regardless of how you want to view it, it's something that Eric can do on an alternate Earth, and it has devastating effects. Context time. In Ultimates 3 Volume 1 Issue 5 from 2008, Magneto is pretty fired up over the deaths of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who are incestuous in this universe, might I add. In a battle between Ultron and the Ultimates, that universe's version of the Avengers, Thor ends up dropping his hammer into a crevice, unable to get to it. And Magneto uses this to his advantage, manipulating the iron that is found within the hammer to use it. Which, I mean, it is made of Uru too, so I guess it's only trace iron. Anyway, use it he does. He creates a massive flood in New York with it, which kills thousands and separates the Ultimates team. It's eventually taken away from him when the X-Men join the fight and Cyclops defeats him. Moving on to number 7, Electromagnetic Spectrum Manipulation. That's a mouthful. If being able to concentrate hard enough to manipulate the iron in his foes' bodies wasn't enough, Magneto can also manipulate the electromagnetic field. This means he can control radio waves, X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves, and ultraviolet waves. He once used this power to divert radiation from a nuclear blast. He has also used it to induce mental effects, like in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1 Issue 304. After the death of Illyana Rasputin, Magneto and his acolytes decide to crash her funeral, but not to fight. Instead, Magneto uses his abilities to control their motor functions by freezing their neural conductivity. He was experiencing a bit of a power boost at the time, might I add. This basically froze the X-Men in place so Magneto could have his moment to shine and give a big ol' evil speech. Overall, it's a really great issue to read if you're a Magneto fan. But this power of his kinda makes him OP, doesn't it? Now to be fair, it does require a great deal of energy and takes a massive toll on him physically whenever he exerts this power, but it's still a hell of a lot of power. Moving on to number 6, Electromagnetic Sight. Because of his ability to manipulate energy on the electromagnetic spectrum, Magneto also has something called electromagnetic sight. Essentially, he can visually perceive the world beyond normal sight, beyond the spectrum of visible light. He can see the electromagnetic aura that all living beings give off. This is where the whole Magneto Protocols thing comes from. Because he's seen as a threat, a network of satellites was placed low in Earth's orbit, used as a cautionary tool in order to skew the Earth's electromagnetic field and prevent the Master of Magnetism from using his powers on the planet itself. I mean, that just pissed him off more, so he unleashed a planet-wide EMP that disabled basically every electronic device on the planet within a very short period of time. I mean, one hell of an FU, that's for sure.
Number 5. Wolverine Origins. Wolverine has been alive for a very, very long time, and as a result, he has been through a lot, giving him a very complicated family history. For a long time, his history was a mystery, but over time, it got over-explained. In 2006, Marvel created a series called Wolverine Origins, which was about Wolverine discovering elements from his past, including how linked he is to other characters. This isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't really add to the character's mythos in any meaningful way. For example, he discovers that James Hudson of Alpha Flight, who was one of the first people to help Logan after his Weapon X experiment, was actually one of his cousins. Not only that, but Hudson's half-brother was actually Professor Thornton, the man who captured Wolverine and experimented on him to give him his metal claws. What an interesting revelation. One of his best friend's brothers is one of his worst enemies. Does it ever come up or have any impact on the plot? No, but it sure made his family tree more complicated. The story is filled with these kinds of revelations, which don't really impact the character and have the same energy as Dark Helmet telling Lone Star that he is his father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate. It just means absolutely nothing. Number 4, One More Day. Despite the fact that the Spider-Man movies basically just keep telling the same stories over and over again, with a very standard status quo, Spider-Man has grown a lot as a character since he was first introduced. He graduated high school pretty early in his history, and married Mary Jane Watson eventually. They were expecting a child, but MJ had a miscarriage. Peter was a teacher for a while, and during the events of Civil War, he actually revealed his secret identity to the world. Marvel editorial looked at all of this character growth and went, "Blah! Ugh! How do we get back to the status quo people expect?" Their solution was One More Day. In this reviled story, Aunt May is dying, and Peter wants to do anything to save her. The demon Mephisto shows up and offers to save May's life in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage never having happened. He also makes it so no one remembers that Peter is Spider-Man. The couple accepts the deal and wake up with no memories of their marriage. Now, this has caused a lot of confusion over the years regarding the canon. Basically, stuff like the marriage and miscarriage never happened because Mephisto altered time, but all of the adventures that Spider-Man had were still canon, but were affected by a memory wipe. So stuff like the Clone Saga, that relies on the couple's marriage being a major plot point, happened, but slightly differently, I guess? Oh, and Civil War happened. Everyone just forgot that Spider-Man revealed his identity. The actual story is easy enough to follow, but the long-term effects it has on the character's history are really difficult to nail down, and not really worth it, as its only purpose was to get Spidey back to his roots as a lonely single guy, rather than exploring the character and allowing him to grow. Thanks, I hate it. Number 3, the death and return of Superman. When someone decides to start reading Superman comics, one of the first comics they are probably looking forward to reading is the death and return of Superman. Now, even if you are totally caught up with all of the Superman continuity, at that point, there is a lot going on in this story to try and keep track of. There's all the various replacement Supermen to keep track of, like the new Superboy, who is a clone of the original and Lex Luthor, the cyborg Superman, who's really an astronaut who Superman slighted at some point, the Eradicator, who turns out to be a Kryptonian robot designed to protect Superman, and Steel, who is honestly the easiest new character in this to keep track of. Then there's the element of Superman not really being dead, but actually being in a weird Kryptonian coma that he's healing from, and it all culminating in the city from the Green Lantern comics blowing up. Adding to all of this, the story takes place in a very specific era of Superman continuity. So if you're someone who's just skimming the classics but is familiar with the classic version of these characters, there's a lot of weird stuff happening that could be confusing. For example, at this point, Supergirl is a shape-shifting blob named Matrix who is dating Lex Luthor, who has transferred his mind into a younger version of himself who has long red hair and is claiming to be the long-lost son of Lex Luthor from Australia. Number 2, the Clone Saga. The Clone Saga was a long-running event in Spider-Man comics that ran from 1994 all the way to 1996. It tells the story of Spider-Man's clone Ben Reilly coming back to town as a series of other clones show up to fight. They discover that Ben is actually the original and Peter is the clone, prompting Peter to retire as Ben takes over the superhero duties, and then it's eventually revealed that Green Goblin had manipulated the whole thing in a very weird plan, and that Peter was in fact the original and Ben was in fact the clone. This series is convoluted more for editorial issues happening at the time. The story was meant to go on for a year, but was selling so well that the team was told to keep it going an extra year, forcing them to come up with increasingly crazy plot twists. The original intent was for Ben Reilly to stay as Spider-Man, as Marvel was once again trying to undo his marriage so they could get him back to basics. They eventually changed their minds, fearing fan reaction, and there was constant fights about the direction of the story, with Green Goblin both being alive and responsible being forced on the writers by editorial. To make things worse, all these problems made the story so convoluted that in order for any of it to make sense, people had to read an additional book called the Osborn Journal, which was just completely dedicated to the Goblin explaining his plan so that it even remotely remotely made sense to the reader. Number 1. Hawkman's origin story. Hawkman has one of the most notoriously difficult origins to keep track of in all of comics, so I will be giving you an abridged version of his history. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall, spelled like this. Carter becomes Hawkman and fights crime. With me so far? When reintroduced in 1961, he is an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Carter Hall, spelled like this. He comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of an archaeologist named Carter Hall, with the original spelling. It makes sense when you think of him as a total reinvention of the original character. Where things start to get confusing is 2 years later when we learn that the two different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. In 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. How to handle the continuity? Well, they changed it so that they were two different people who just happened to have similar sounding names and were both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original Egyptian prince version operating in the 40s and the alien space cop operating in the 80s. In 1994, Zero Hour happens, and all the various Hawkmen become one guy, but it doesn't stick. In 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is and always has been a space cop from Thanagar. In 2017, Carter with a C is reintroduced, with it being explained that he reincarnates because the knife he was killed with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship, kinda introducing elements of both origins. In 2018, we learned that the two versions have become one again, with the space cop being just one of Carter with a C's many reincarnations, retconning the character to be able to be reborn not just in different eras on Earth, but on different planets as well. So to sum it up briefly, reincarnated Pharaoh becomes space cop, becomes two different people. He is retconned to have only ever been a space cop and is retconned one last time to be a reincarnated Pharaoh who in one of his lives was an alien space cop. Which when you say it like that makes perfect sense. By the way, most of this also applies to Hawkgirl.
Number 10. Vampirism. There was a time in comics, actually a decent chunk of time, and it was recent too, where Jubilee was a vampire. She was bitten by Zaurus, son of Dracula, and that transformed her into a full-fledged creature of the night. And we're talking with all the powers that entails. So of course the superhuman speed and strength, classic traits like turning into vapor. But we're dealing with some cop-out weaknesses. For example, she has a medallion of Zaurus that allows her to walk in the daylight. No, it needs to be a trade-off. You get all these cool abilities, but you lose something as well. If you're chilling off animal blood or at the blood bank and walking around during the day, it really feels far less creature of the damned. Then it's more like you have a character who, yes, is a vampire, but doesn't have all that angsty pathos that comes with it. Quentin Quire would cure Jubilee later on with a shard of the Phoenix Force that also restored her mutant powers, which Jubilee had lost. Number 9. Gymnast / inline skater. Now are those powers? No, they're innate abilities. She trained to be able to do these things, but they've actually been largely forgotten. Jubilee being a gymnast was at one point a huge part of her backstory, but over the years it has faded a bit. The inline skating in particular was used as a way to make her hip and cool with the youth. Greetings, fellow kids. This was because her function was largely to be relatable. In that fashion, she was often lumped into sidekick territory, even with her power set. For example, she was fused with Robin in the Amalgam universe to create Sparrow, and she would also fall head over heels for Robin Tim Drake in their Versus series. Hip and relatable. Let's go to the mall. Number 8. Stroke powers. Now Jubilee can do much more with her powers than just put on a fancy light show, even though she was doing that at the mall early on the start when she first meets the X-Men. No, apparently Jubilee can also cause you to have a stroke by detonating a precision spark of plasmoids in your brain. This can then simulate the effects of a stroke. Firstly, absolutely terrifying. Secondly, how exactly? This is kind of tied to Jubilee's power expansion as the years have gone on. Jubilee has been rendered more and more powerful, almost as a direct take that to people who claim she is a useless member of the team. Number 7. Energy absorption. So Jubilee can absorb the energy she exerts back into herself. Why is this on here? Well, it's cause it's very much a no-brainer kind of course. Her own energy wouldn't hurt her. That would be very awful and sad, like being allergic to water. It's really only worth noting if she can absorb other people's energy. Then that's a whole kinetic energy trade-off. Number 6. Abscissa. So here we're dealing with an alternate timeline on Earth 92352. In this world, Jubilee was captured by Mojo and brought to the Big Crunch, which was to be the collapse of the universe, which would then be followed by another Big Bang. She was a slave to Mojo in trade for him not disrupting the universe's cycle. Her powers here were a little different. She didn't seem to have her standard plasmoids, and instead could whip the chains on her costume and bind them in loops around other people. She had loops, and it was very BDSM. Is that a power or a skill? Well, I mean, if gymnastics is on here, so can whipping chains. Number 5, Team X, Vertigo. To yet another world in the multiverse we go. This time for a Jubilee who could manifest several light-based daggers. This was putting her abilities in the realm of creating solid constructs she could fight with. She was also wearing a costume that led to her codename Vertigo. She was part of a resistance movement against Majestrix Alana, the daughter of Charles Xavier and Shi'ar leader Landra. Here Jubilee could also turn invisible. So here her powers were much more like Dazzlers than her standard power set. It just goes to show that some mutants have powers that can be interpreted a variety of ways. Number 4, XMen Animated. So the 90s X-Men is largely responsible for the perception of Jubilee as ineffectually shooting fireworks at things, especially Sentinels. Her powers here would regularly just bounce off of people. The Blob even described them as tickling. So she was used more for distraction than anything. And this is the Jubilee that many flash to when they think of the character. Great show and nothing wrong with Jubilee in it, but definitely not a powerhouse. And that's okay. Your team needs levels. Number 3, Wondra. So Jubilee was one of the mutants who was depowered after M-Day. You know, no more mutants, end of House of M fallout. Jubilee was devastated at the loss of her powers, and would end up replacing them with a suit that gave her, in a way more powers, or at least different powers than she had before. She would join the New Warriors and get a tech suit from Night Thrasher. This suit would give her superhuman strength, 9 vulnerability, and also grant her the ability to fly. So a lot. This was enough to alleviate her depression over the loss of her powers. The thing was, this new set led her down a path where writers were not exactly sure what to do with her, hence how she became a vampire. Number 2, immunity to telepathy. For a time, a brief time, early in her comic history, Jubilee had the natural innate ability to be resistant to telepathy. She has had built-in psionic shields. However, this ability would be abandoned because it would run into the okay, why factor. And also it seemed to slant her to having too many advantages. Powers and immune to telepathy, just cuz? Not something everyone could swallow. She's just special. No, stop it. And finally, in at number 1, subatomic nuclear potential. Let's get controversial here at number 1. Emma Frost has revealed that she believes Jubilee has the most untapped potential of any mutant she has ever encountered. That Jubilee is holding herself back on a subconscious level because she doesn't want to hurt anyone. This is something Jubilee has admitted to, a fear of her powers. For example, after they got out of control and destroyed a house after she thought that Wolverine had died in it. Jubilee apparently could affect matter at a subnuclear level. Now, mileage on this varies. Some love it, all that potential. Take that, she only has fireworks, people. While others feel it's too much. Calm down, it's okay if not every mutant is approaching Omega level. Some feel that the power scales are sliding too far in the powerful direction. What do you think? Let me know down below.
Starting us off in at number 10, he is resistant to hypnosis. The Super Soldier Serum gives Cap immunity towards specific toxins and accelerates his metabolism, but it also gives him resistance to hypnosis, which is really cool, except for the fact that the resistance to hypnosis is kind of moot in a few ways when you're incredibly vulnerable to manipulation in the first place, and that is something that Cap definitely is. Now before you Cap fans get upset over this, it's true. Cap has on numerous occasions been incredibly susceptible and responsive to manipulation. He's been manipulated into doing things for Hydra and other foes on several occasions. Hell, a version of Steve was going around shouting "Hail Hydra" in 2017's Secret Empire after all, guys. I know it wasn't the real Steve Rogers or the 616 Steve Rogers, but come on. Look at how he was manipulated by Hydra when they covertly were running S.H.I.E.L.D. to secretly do their bidding in the MCU. Yeah, ultimately Rogers just wants to serve the greater good, but sometimes he can be naive about it. I mean, it's not totally a bad quality to have, to see the good in everybody and want to trust people. And at number 9, Capwolf. Captain America can become a werewolf, or at least he has become a werewolf in the past. He briefly had werewolf powers in 1992 during a 6-part story arc titled Man and Wolf in Captain America issue 402. In the woods outside of Massachusetts, X-Men member Wolverine finds a dead body, so he calls Cap in for assistance. While investigating, Steve ends up uncovering a town containing a bunch of lycanthropes, and of course, in the process, he himself is transformed into a werewolf. It's Capwolf, a vicious superhero with all the powers of Captain America and all the powers of a werewolf. Despite it not sticking, this wasn't the only time that a Captain America has become a werewolf. Sam Wilson would experience a similar situation years later while operating under the mantle. That's kind of fun. Moving on to number 8, his musical abilities. Okay, so this one is a little silly, and it's an almost ability, sort of. Back in 1985, we almost added Broadway musical star to the list of things that Captain America has done. Cap was meant to have his own musical with an estimated budget of $4 million. The concept actually sounds a little amazing. Also, this was outside of the comics, guys. The story would have followed Steve Rogers suffering through a midlife crisis, lulz, then running off on a mission to rescue his girlfriend from a terrorist who kidnapped her. As you can imagine, a lot of people thought it was a terrible idea. Needless to say, nothing came from this idea aside from a poster advertising it in comic books, looking for girls aged 10 to 14 for the cast to play what was described as Cap's special friend. Yikes. Keeping on that silly train, that brings us to our next number. In at 7, he can be a convincing Nazi. Cap has been a Nazi more than most heroes, and definitely more than any of his Avengers peers. That's kind of a skill, right? The ability to be a convincing Nazi, yeah. Aside from Secret Empire in 2017, the whole thing was a different Steve Rogers, it's a long story. Cap has also raised his fascist flag in 1965 and in 1979. The former was in Tales of Suspense, issue 67, and the latter in Captain America, issue 234. Both times he snapped out of it though before the conclusion of the story. So, not a permanent Nazi, but Nazi for a day. Eugh. Still bad. Speaking of bad, in number 6, super racism. Captain America used to be quite racist back in the 40s, as in he literally used to go around shouting, I quote, "White America is a strong America." Wow. Now this is very much a product of the wartime comics, where comics were largely used as propaganda even before the US entered into the fray of World War II. Cap and other heroes, including DC's Superman and Batman, found themselves saying pretty terrible things and doing pretty terrible things with other races and cultures, including the Japanese and the Chinese, who were largely targets in pop culture media at that time. So why is this on a powers list? Because characters the likes of Captain America have great influence over their readers, especially considering he is such an important patriotic symbol. What he does in his panels matter. While this is obviously no longer the case, Cap is anything but racist these days, it is still a startling panel to see.
Number 5, Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol has been around for a long time, and some people believe the X-Men are actually a ripoff of Doom Patrol since they were around first. There are a lot of things in these comics that make them just out of this world to read, from the conflicts themselves to the villains and even some of the heroes, including a hero that is a sentient teleporting street. Some of the other characters featured include the Beard Hunter, a Punisher kind of character that wages a lonely war against facial hair, the Quiz, a supervillain that has every superpower you haven't thought of, and Flex Mentallo, who uses his power of muscle mystery to turn the Pentagon into a circle. It's just wild, but it's not a bad story by any means, don't get me wrong. It's incredibly thought-provoking and really entertaining to read, but that's only when it isn't confusing. Some of the conflicts we see the Doom Patrol in are just wild. For example, in one storyline, the Brotherhood of Dada ended up trapping all of Paris in a painting, and the Doom Patrol go jumping into that painting, eventually teaming up with the Brotherhood to defeat the 5th Horseman of the Apocalypse that then gets transformed into a kid's rocking horse. The confusingness of this comic, I think, comes more so from a place of just trying to believe what you're reading half the time. Number 4, Final Crisis. If we are talking confusing, then you know one of DC Comics' many crisis events will make the list. Last time we spoke about the Crisis on Infinite Earths, but this time we're going to be talking about the Final Crisis, which isn't actually the final one. You may not be surprised at this point to hear that this confusing story was also plotted out by our friend Grant Morrison, who seems to be responsible for more than half of the stories on this list. For Final Crisis though, there are a few things that just make it confusing as hell. Basically, the story sees Darkseid invade the Earth. That's normal, but it's when the anti-life equation becomes involved that things go all over. In the build-up to Final Crisis, Morrison gave DC a very rough outline of the book so they could do a build-up, but they had their own ideas on what the book should be, so they tailored the build-up to what they thought Final Crisis should be, and Morrison completely ignored everything that DC did. So the build-up is basically useless. The 7 issues that make up the actual story, however, are very hard to follow with the perspective of the story and which characters are involved, jumping from panel to panel and page to page. There are so many different characters involved, some of which are hella obscure, or are returning with no explanation like Barry Allen. I mean, Superman defeats the villain by singing. That's what we're dealing with here. Singing Superman. Number 3, Power Girl. Thanks to Crisis on Infinite Earths, we talked about in part 1, many characters were changed and one of them was Power Girl, and it wasn't for the better. So essentially, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Kara was no longer the cousin of Superman. Instead, Kara's background was completely altered. With Earth 2 no longer existing, Kara's origin was altered and she was now the granddaughter of the Atlantean sorcerer Arion, and had been frozen in suspended animation for millennia until the present day, making her actually an Atlantean. She got a brand new costume, and for a really long time she believed that she belonged under the sea, speaking with fish and chilling with Aquaman. This remained the same all the way until Infinite Crisis, when Earth 2 and the original Superman was brought back. Kara learned that it was apparently all a trick, and Kara had indeed been a Kryptonian all along. The Psycho Pirate showed Kara multiple versions of her origin in an effort to drive her insane, but eventually revealed that she was not only Kryptonian, but also a survivor of the entire Earth 2 universe, and she regained her memories when she met Lois Lane Kent. And then we have Supergirl, who is also an alternate reality version of the same person, and we're not going to talk about that. Number 2, Generations. The DC Elseworld stories are some of my favorite ones, because largely, the stories are self-contained. Doesn't mean they can't be convoluted though. Elseworlds Generations is a great example. Generations basically gets rid of the idea of comic book time, following Batman and Superman's first appearances in the 1930s and then onward in real time. The two heroes basically remain unchanged throughout time, which makes sense for Superman, but for the Dark Knight, he exists forever because he essentially becomes the immortal Ra's al Ghul. It's not too bad, but it's in the third arc of the series, Generations 3, things get really wacky. Centuries pass between each of the 12 issues in the arcs, which is confusing enough if you aren't prepared for it. But then, in the final issues, that's when Darkseid invades and time travel rears its convoluted head. In the final battle, Batman and Superman are transported back to the 1930s and the first issue from Generations 1. When the day is finally saved, Supes and Batman lose all their memories and start all over again, basically meaning Generations is one big convoluted circle. And finally, in at number 1, Carol and Marcus. This one is not only confusing, but it's a little disturbing too, which I think might also help to make it even more confusing. So basically, in Avengers 197 from 1980, Carol Danvers, back when she was Miss Marvel, discovers that she's pregnant. She doesn't remember how it happened, and that sweet baby is growing pretty quick. Not 3 issues later, in Avengers 200, Carol pops the little sucker out within days of even finding out that she was pregnant. All the Avengers are like weirdly excited about it, as if it's not the weirdest thing ever, and they treat Carol like she's the unreasonable one for not being excited. The baby, who has been named Marcus, grows up into adulthood in basically hours and reveals that he is actually the son of Immortus, the ruler of Limbo and one of the different incarnations of Kang the Conqueror. Immortus had Marcus with a woman he had apparently plucked out of time, but Marcus was trapped in Limbo until he could be born on Earth. So, Marcus had brought Danvers to Limbo, romanced her with a combination of charm and, quote, subtle manipulation from Immortus' machines, and he got Miss Marvel pregnant so he could be born on Earth. The fact that they go on to explore the romance before it was retconned is one thing, but, like, scientifically, that actually makes no sense, and it's confusing as hell.
Number 10, shot by a diamond bullet. This is actually a pretty smart way to deal with Emma Frost, but all in all a pretty dumb way for her to die when you kind of read it on paper. Both like makes sense and doesn't make sense. I mean, Emma Frost has a diamond form, which makes her pretty much indestructible, for the most part anyways. So how does one defeat her when she's in her diamond form? Apparently by exposing the flaw in her diamond form and using the same material to kill her. How do you shatter a diamond? With another diamond, apparently. I don't know if that would actually work, but comic book science. Emma's diamond form is her secondary mutation, and while we've seen many attacks on her defended by this form of hers, apparently a diamond bullet can just insta-shatter her. I mean, I've heard of diamonds cutting diamonds, but never necessarily being used to completely shatter a diamond. If shot at her exact weak point though, apparently this is just what a diamond bullet can do, which is something one of the Cuckoos, Esme, knew about and exposed to kill Emma, mind-controlling mutant Angel Salvador to carry out the execution. Don't worry though, Jean, while merged with the Phoenix, managed to bring her back with Beast's help. Jean can do anything.
Number 9, taken out by the Punisher. Some of the most creative forms of transportation to the afterlife come at the hands of Frank Castle, the Punisher. But at the end of the day, Frank is just one seriously messed up guy. A normal guy with a good chunk of training, a hell of an arsenal, and a little bit of creativity. He is not a match for a lot of the incredibly powerful beings out in Marvel Comics, but somehow we have the Punisher kills the Marvel Universe story. When his family were taken out by being bystanders of a superhero conflict, Frank is given the backing to take out all those who call themselves superheroes, and my god, a lot of these deaths make no sense, because of course they don't. He takes out the Hulk by waiting until he is Bruce Banner again, but that's never how the Hulk has worked in Marvel Comics. He took down Dr. Doom, with his only excuse for winning being that Doom stopped to give a speech, which does kind of make sense, but the worst example comes when he takes on the mutants. By the sheer will of lazy writing and Frank's throwaway explanation of manipulation, all the combined X-teams are having their final battle against Magneto, Apocalypse, and their unholy alliance of acolytes and evil mutants on the moon in an air-sealed dome, which is where Frank drops a nuke on them, taking them all out. Ignore the fact that a good chunk of those here would be able to survive that kind of attack, and we're all good.
Number 8. EMP versus Phoenix Force. This has to be one of the most ridiculous ones. The Phoenix is typically known as being an unstoppable, undefeatable entity. I mean, the first time around, the only way that it was able to be defeated was basically by self-sacrifice. However, that hasn't stopped people from somehow banishing it or straight up killing the entity. Case in point, when Magneto defeated Jean Grey as the Phoenix by administering a powerful electromagnetic pulse, which gave her a planetary-sized stroke. Literally, those are the direct words from the comic. That is some major comic stuff right there. Only in comics would that happen.
Number 7. Being a part of X-Statics. Lots of deaths in X-Statics were stupid, but that was the point. The whole thing was a bit of a satire on reality TV. The team itself isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams out in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The members of the team aren't exactly the most impressive. The original team made up of mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of Super Puke, La Nuit, who has Dark Force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who is basically a squid. They went by X-Force, which as you may know shares its name with a much more impressive team. But all those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist himself, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of X-Statics who have passed away over their history, with only 9 of them surviving. So yeah, don't ever join this team.
Number 6. Eaten by birds. Miss Arrow has a pretty wild death in the comics. For those of you who are unfamiliar or haven't heard of her, that is probably because you know her by a different name, the Other. That is right, Miss Arrow is actually the extremely powerful spider totem entity that is linked to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. As such, she is entirely made up of spiders, despite sometimes appearing to be human while under the guise of Miss Arrow. Because of this, she was at one time killed by a bunch of birds who devoured the spiders that made her up, with Peter squishing the final spider that survived the bird attack. This wouldn't be the end of the Other though, as one more day messed up the whole continuity thanks to reality being warped, with Peter having actually never accepted the Other in this alternate, which is now the main, reality.
Number 5. Being dumb. Magneto in the Ultimate Universe was like the bad guy. He was nuts, and he had the power to back it up, which he proved when he used his abilities to offset the magnetic poles, which put the whole world into chaos. Tidal waves in New York, mega flash freezes in Latveria, volcanoes erupting in the Amazon, all that good stuff. Naturally, the survivors were not happy, and they would be coming after Magneto with a vengeance. They aren't dumb, so of course their attack on the villain would be planned out. Right? Well, it doesn't seem like it was. While all the surviving heroes make their assault on Magneto's fortress, the hot-headed Warren Worthington, you know, the guy whose only power is that he has wings, decides that he is going to jump the gun and come full speed blasting through a window, giving Magneto a good old punch to the face. Magneto could have squashed this guy like a bug in one swift move, but he doesn't even think Angel is worth the effort. Instead, he lets Sabretooth, his mad dog, do the deed. Sabretooth pounces on him, rips one of Warren's wings off with his mouth, and then stomps on the mutant's neck, taking him off the board in one page. Idiot.
Number 4. Waking up Fin Fang Foom. Something you shouldn't ever do? Wake up a sleeping dragon, as Jerry Carpenter learned in Hulk vs. Fin Fang Foom issue number 1, which admittedly is a pretty wild and weird story, so if you're into that, you should go check it out. Here, as promised, the two beings end up fighting, but first, we're treated to a story clearly inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing. Probably also why this guy's named Jerry Carpenter. You see what's happening here? Except Fin Fang Foom is the shapeshifter in this tale. For those who don't know, Fin Fang Foom is actually an alien whose race is actually known for their shapeshifting abilities. I feel like not a lot of people think about that, but that is a thing. Needless to say, Jerry finds Foom below the ice and sends for the rest of his team up in the Arctic. They're basically like a research team, but instead of just waiting, he is hasty to proceed because he basically wants to name this newfound finding of what he believes is an undiscovered type of dinosaur after himself. He smashes through the ice with a pick, only to awaken Foom. Foom blasts forth and takes Carpenter for his host, basically wearing him like a skin suit. The really weird thing though is I think this is the only case of Foom like actually needing to do this. He claims he's attempting to rebuild his strength by merging with hosts and is like looking for a real strong host when he runs into the Hulk, but I don't think he's ever actually needed to do that before or after this point ever again. And he can just shapeshift on his own. He doesn't actually need a human host to turn into a human, so there's a lot of weird stuff happening in this comic. But hey, if you gotta make Hulk and Foom fight, I guess you gotta do some weird stuff.
Number 3. Falling on Rogue. Nothing stands up to falling on a woman who leeches life away, unable to pick herself up. Well, falling isn't the right word. It was more like Mr. Sinister was held down. Following the events of M-Day, a mutant named Hope Summers is born, bringing hope to the mutant species. Well, Mr. Sinister, he reassembled the Marauders and planned to control the future of mutant kind by stealing Hope. Sinister knew this and wanted to use Hope to control the mutant population because the mutants can't just have something without a villain trying to mess it all up. Sinister regrouped his Marauders alongside Mystique, who knew that Hope was necessary to save her daughter, Rogue, from her out-of-control powers. Well, Sinister failed to capture Hope, and like an idiot, he informs Mystique that he is unable to help her save Rogue. Safe to say that Mystique doesn't appreciate that very much. She grabs and shoves Sinister's face onto the unconscious Rogue, and unable to get up, his life is sucked away. Now I'll admit, it's a little bit awesome, but in the massive gallery of villains losing their life, it's arguably one of the lamest ones. Imagine Sinister having to tell people about this one when he eventually returns. Embarrassing.
Number 2, turned into a sundae. I don't actually know if Ice Cream died here, but it certainly seems to be implied that he did. At least to me it does. This is the canon that lives in my mind. Ice Cream was a character who could turn into ice cream, hence his name. Ice Cream, get it? He infiltrated the X-Mansion in the first and only issue of Obnoxio the Clown. Speaking of weird comics, that's another one. He wanted revenge on the X-Men because they had cooler mutant powers than he did. Although how he really planned to get said revenge and beat them when his powers only allowed him to turn into ice cream, I'm not really sure. He attempted to turn the danger room on the students, but this plan ended up failing, with Professor X lowering the temperature of the control room to below freezing, which caused Ice Cream to freeze solid. At the end of the story, Obnoxio the Clown decorates Ice Cream as a giant sundae, while Ice Cream's fate is left ultimately undetermined. We never see him again, and it's possible that he literally could have met his end by being mistaken and consumed as actual ice cream at some point later in his life, so yeah.
Number 1. Just take off the quiver. A lot of the time when a hero's light goes out, it will be in an ultimate display of self-sacrifice, throwing themselves into impossible circumstances in order to save the majority. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that kind of thing. It's the number 1 heroic move, but it only really works when there is absolutely no other option. When looking at Hawkeye's sacrifice in Avengers Disassembled, there were a whole handful of other options, and most of them were pretty obvious, making for a heroic self-sacrifice that just ended up coming across as incredibly dumb and unnecessary. Basically, Wanda Maximoff has gone completely bonkers and turned on the Avengers, but none of them know that just yet. She's already caused the passing of both Vision and Scott Lang Ant-Man, and all the Avengers have assembled in order to figure out what the heck was happening. Using her hex powers, she created a Kree warship to show up out of nowhere and go on the attack. Hawkeye runs off to go get some more arrows, and when he comes back, he goes off, taking out Kree left, right, and center until he is hit in his explosive arrow quiver by an energy weapon. With his quiver on fire and set to explode, instead of just taking it off or firing off the arrows, Hawkeye grabs a Kree with a jetpack and blasts off into the warship, blowing both it and himself clean off the battlefield. just silly.
Number 10. Immune to mystical attacks. When you're a superhero, you need to be prepared for pretty much anything. There are a wide array of different types of villains that can come your way. This of course includes magic. So T'Challa worked to find a way to render himself immune to mystical attacks as a way to deal with Doctor Doom. Cause one must never forget that Doctor Doom is a master of science and magic, for he is Doom, and he doesn't discriminate. He has no time for science versus magic pettiness. So T'Challa got an alchemical upgrade that made him able to detect, hide from, and be impervious to mystical attack. Now mileage on this varies. For some it's cool. He saw a problem and a weakness and he solved it. But for others it's like, well, isn't this like when you're playing on the playground, the kid is like, nuh-uh, you can't hit me because suddenly I have immunity. T'Challa can already do a lot, so for some this was overkill. Number 9. Reanimate the dead. Oh yes, Black Panther is a necromancer and actually king of the dead. So he can raise the dead and create and command a zombie army, which may not sound like the most heroic ability, but I guess it's all in how you use it. He was anointed as king of the undead, and with that came all of these mystical abilities. The thing with an ability like this is not only does it feel like it skews villainously, but it also is something that changes the scope of many conflicts. I mean, there are dead people everywhere, so any conflict is just potential zombie horde, or maybe at least zombie gang, or henchmen, or wait, heroic, okay, zombie sidekick. Number 8. Humanoid Panther. Earth X is one of the well-remembered alternate universe Marvel stories, a dystopian world where a mutagenic virus has run rampant, courtesy of, you guessed it, Reed Richards. The way these mutations manifested varied, but in Black Panther's case, he became a panther. A human panther. Panther Man. Cat Man. It's hard to be a menacing cat man. I mean, you can push and make a credible case, but it's an uphill battle. The whole story was pretty interesting though, so actual Panther Black Panther fit right in. He fit right in. Marvel is currently mining its past successes, so there is a follow-up series following some miscellaneous characters and kind of a prequel to Earth X, and so far it's pretty solid. Number 7. Bronze Tiger. Now the Amalgam universe has some mashups that people will never forget. I mean, here on this channel we won't let you forget about Darkclaw, ever, even if you wanted to. But not every Amalgam was one that people felt was spot on, and some felt a little thrown together. Case in point, Bronze Tiger. So Bronze Tiger was a combination of Black Panther and Bronze Tiger, just full on having the name of one of them, not even like Black Tiger or something like that. Also, Bronze Tiger started off as a villain, then transitioned into anti-hero, so he seems a bit of an odd matchup. The history is very brief and seems far more T'Challa, only now the name is Ben'Chala. Ben'Chala. B''N''Chala. Number 6. Mangaverse. So on Earth X, T'Challa was a literal Panther Man. In the mangaverse, oh, it's so much better. So he's a dude with a pet panther who can summon spirits. And when he does so, him and his panther combine into Black Panther. Again, a Panther Man. But this time a dude literally fused with the cat. He could also become the Falcon, because why not? Summoning spirits and animal transfiguration. Practically the same thing. I can't think about any of this without thinking about Manimal. Number 5. Acute senses. Now you may be thinking, are you okay? Hypersenses are a good thing. However, not when they get to the point where they overwhelm you. Sometimes on rare occasions, when it behooves the plot, T'Challa's abilities can be a bit of a hindrance rather than a help. So even though other characters are rocking their acute senses in regular situations, sometimes T'Challa can't. Sometimes they play this off as because they're so acute, stronger than other people's. That's why he is king. That's not true, but it still sounds as legit as anything else, you know, when it comes to the fluctuating scale of his senses. Now this does actually make sense, but it comes down to a matter of consistency. Number 4. Spirit energy constructs. So back to King of the Dead. Not only can T'Challa raise a zombie army, but if your body is no more than just, well, you know, it's done, he can raise your spirit and create a kind of physical construct body for you to inhabit. So you'll be corporeal and be able to do some damage. That's intense. This is high sorcery. Scary T'Challa. Let the dead rest. But what he really does with this is create a magic spirit of ectoplasm that can affect both our physical plane and the nether realm. Plus it looks cool. Number 3. Black Panda. Welcome back to the world of Peter Porker, the spectacular Spider-Ham, world of quirky Looney Tunes-esque characters and plenty of animal puns. If you love those two things, then this book is for you. On this universe, instead of Black Panther, we have Black Panda, and he doesn't appear too often, but has all the abilities of Black Panther, or at least that's what it seems like. But he's all cute and chibified and looks a little bit like Mickey Mouse. Kinda, sorta, a smidge. Either way, Black Panda is super cute. Number 2. Ghost Panther. The Infinity Warps universe. More amalgams, but this time with other characters within the Marvel universe. So here we have a fusion of Black Panther and Ghost Rider, specifically Johnny Blaze. Here we have a young T'Challa who is arrogant and rebellious and exiled from Wakanda after getting in some beef with his dad. So he went to America where he met Jericho Simpson, who became his new mentor and renamed him Johnny Blaze. Just cuz. He took up stunt work. But then while doing a stunt, he felt his father dying, which broke his concentration, so he died too. Then he was revived and offered Ghost Rider's powers. I mean, just cuz. He wasn't down for it at first, but accepted when it gave him the opportunity to take on his father's killers. Number 1. Hypercosmic awareness. So Black Panther has been exposed to the mind of Galactus, and this combined with his exposure to the Heart Herb, well, it's changed him. He was able to see the confines of the Marvel Universe, and eventually also the multiverse. So he could have visions of things occurring outside of the 616. What good does this do? Well, I mean, it's great when there's imminent doom. Otherwise, it would just be annoying. Oh man, I know that Peter B. Parker got a gym membership. This information, the world needs it. Alert the media. Black Panther, gossip monger. That would never happen, but it's fun to think about.
Number 10. Maybe he's born with it. This was a weird one. So, in the X-Men universe, mutant powers generally manifest around the time of puberty. But, according to the promos Fox made for Days of Future Past, Colossus was born with his powers due to being exposed to the fallout from the Chernobyl disaster. So, this means that even as a baby, his mother would have given birth, nursed, and, I can only assume, changed dirty diapers filled with ball bearings for a weird metal baby. Then again, he doesn't need to eat in his metal form, so maybe he didn't digest anything. And I'm thinking way too hard about this. I don't know how I feel about this movie universe. Point is, being born a metal baby? Kinda dumb. Number 9. While Colossus' metal body is generally indestructible, in the events of World War Hulk managed to bend Colossus' arm backwards, effectively disabling Colossus and trapping him in his metal form. Now obviously, if Hulk bent any human arm backwards, they'd snap like twigs. But with Colossus, we have someone who is stuck with his arms pointed backwards until someone fixes them, which generally requires a mutant who can superheat them and another mutant who can bend them back into place. What's the opposite of a healing factor? Because that's what Colossus has. Number 8. He was Mr. Sinister. Maybe. The Earth X comic series features a Colossus that states to Nightcrawler that at one point, he was Mr. Sinister who went back in time to manipulate members of the X-Men. Thing is, assuming that was actually the case, that fact doesn't really amount to anything. All we end up with is a Colossus who has the powers of Mr. Sinister and doesn't do anything with them. And considering this series takes place in the alternate reality of Earth 9997, we'll likely never really see this plot point go anywhere. Ah well. A telepathic near indestructible man might have been a little too OP anyway. Number 7. Magneto can heal him. Almost. In Uncanny X-Men number 212, after being injured by Riptide, Colossus succumbs to his injuries and collapses to the ground, while still stuck in his metal state. Rogue offers to absorb his powers and change him back to a human, but does not, as the shock of his injuries might kill him. Magneto, a temporary ally of the X-Men at the time, proceeds to attempt to heal Colossus, and while he is successful at repairing his injuries, the process leaves Colossus paralyzed, which renders Colossus' primary ability kind of obnoxious for any healthcare professional, especially considering Magneto isn't usually on his side. So let's hope no one hurts Colossus too bad. Speaking of which, number 6. Movie Colossus needs to breathe. Yeah. Look, I am not going to gripe with what is unquestionably one of the most fun comic book movies probably ever, but there is a weird moment in Deadpool where Angel Dust chokes Colossus and it works. So the movie Colossus has all these powers to turn everything on him into metal, including his gentlemanly bits, yet his lungs remain organic? Kinda weird, especially since Colossus has been used in the comics as a go-to guy when there's no oxygen available. Bizarre choice, but hey, it's a comedy, so let's not take this too seriously. We'll just hope that he doesn't smoke. Number 5. Weaker metal eyes. While Colossus is able to turn the entirety of his body into a near indestructible metal, the same cannot be said for his eyes. While they do turn into metal, they don't turn into the same kind of metal, so they're a highly vulnerable pressure point for him. And they've been used to disable him, like his fight with Sam Wilson in Ultimate Nightmare number 5, who, after being grabbed by Colossus, decides to poke him in the eyes. Not exactly a great weakness for a guy who likes to pick stuff up. Maybe make a note to hold your enemies by the hand and watch out for any back tentacles or Dr. Octopus limbs coming at you, just to be safe. Number 4. He can kiss Rogue. Yeah, this was a weird one-off. So, in X-Men number 100, in a lull between the relationships Rogue and Colossus had with other characters, a romantic moment occurred between the two which led to a sweet kiss. And as any Rogue fan should know, this almost always leads to pretty bad results. But this time,
nothing happened. Which you would think, hey, this is perfect. Someone can be with Rogue risk-free. But this never really amounts to anything, which is a shame, because they're a cute couple. Alas, their love is never meant to be. Rest in peace, Rogue Colossus. Number 3. Full metal body, full human strength. So, in Ultimate X-Men 94, it's revealed that initially, Colossus did not possess super strength when turning into his metal form. As a result, he couldn't move, making him nothing more than a strange statue. So, to fix this problem, Colossus starts taking Banshee, a substance that acts as something of a steroid for mutants. The problem is, this turned Colossus into a drug addict, which, as anyone will tell you, is really not good. Thankfully, Colossus retained his powers after he stopped using Banshee, so he no longer has any motivation to be an addict, but this is a pretty crummy superpower when you consider what he has to do to make it functional. Good thing he didn't get his powers as a baby in this universe. Number 2. He gets taller. Look, being tall is great. Speaking as a perfectly even 6-foot man, there is no downside to being above average height. That said, when you cross that threshold from 6'4" to literally anything higher, life becomes tremendously inconvenient. Peter Rasputin is already 6'6", a height that already puts him in contention with most door frames. But when transforming, he grows nearly another foot. That man can never stand comfortably in a basement ever. Of course, maybe I'm biased, but as someone who's tried living in a downstairs apartment, I can say most weren't designed with tall people in mind. But hey, at least he's not Apache Chief. Number 1. Being a metal man in a series where your main villain is Magneto. Look, for most intents and purposes, Colossus's powers are awesome. But the problem is, he exists in a universe with this guy, which makes him a complete liability when what is arguably the most famous X-Men villain decides to show up. Kinda makes all that super strength and bulletproof body a bit unusable when the guy you're up against can bend, warp, and literally pin you to a wall with nothing more than a wave of his hand. Doesn't it? He might have been better off staying a villain. At least then he'd cross Magneto less often. Oh well, I still love you, Colossi.
Number 10. Empathy. Empathic powers tend to flounder when they are on their own, hence in the superhero world you will often find them paired with other abilities. For example, while empathy may be a large part of Raven's abilities, it is not the only part. She can also influence emotion, and also her soul self and whole host of demonic abilities. All of this is cause if you just have empathic abilities, you run into the Deanna Troi situation. I'm sensing hostility, Captain. Now, knowing someone's emotional state would be an asset, but without even telepathy to back it up, you'd still be kind of guessing, like, are they mad because of what happened in your battle or negotiation, or because the store ran out of hazelnut milk? You don't know. Also, you can't just yell it out. Hold up, Titans, he's sad. It's a very I know something you don't know maybe kind of power. However, as soon as you partner up with something else, it goes up a whole other level. Number 9. Immortality. Now, being immortal doesn't always have the guarantee of coming with eternal youth, or lack of pain or disease, or even not being able to die. People just assume. But what if you're immortal and just becoming a prune? Or you get sick and then you're just sick forever, living as one massive tumor? Or you can still die painfully but then get resurrected again. This one, like before, needs some kind of backup. Super strength, youth, Lazarus pits, anything. And you still need to contend with the existential dread of losing all those you care about and your connection to humanity. If you feel like you can't keep up with music after like a decade, imagine keeping up with people and trends after a century. Full-time job. Could you stay good, or do you think you'd get a little weird if you were immortal? Me? Full Louis de Pointe-de-Lac, cabin full of books. Life goals. Number 8. Precognition. Now, precognition sounds like a great ability. You can see the future and then you can change it. But no, think about it. Either way, you've been Cassandra'd. So, you see the future, and you change it. Well, that means the future is fluid. So how good was your prediction in the first place? Did you change it? Would it always have changed? Or the other option, the future is inevitable. No matter what you do, you are hurtling towards that timeline. Heck, maybe even you trying to change it sets it on that path. Great. Well, what good is knowing then? It is more useful if you can change things, but then you have to live in a world of all these shifting potentialities. I guess it would also depend on how strong the ability was. Like, what if you were seeing things you couldn't exactly place, like somebody brushing their teeth, but evilly, but with no other clues? Then someone might try to steal you, and that might set off a Civil War II or a Minority Report. It's a whole thing. More trouble than it's worth. Number 7, color manipulation. So when we're talking about this, we're talking mostly about the Color Kid, who can change the color of any object at will. Now, cool for your career as an interior decorator extraordinaire, but for your crime-fighting career, less so. So this character once used this to mask a MacGuffin so that the villain couldn't find it. But I mean, this is a stopgap measure. He also tripped someone, because he blended an object into the floor. So distraction at best, annoyance at worst. Now you could work this, but you'd have to be one think on your toes color manipulator. So many other careers. Children's entertainer, that would be another good one. Teach the young ones all about mixing colors. Number 6, omniscience. So omniscience sounds great, you know everything, but it tends to freeze a person in place a bit, enraptured by all the knowledge they have, especially if they have a certain chair. To quote Batman, I am never getting out of this chair. 3 Jokers, Joe Chill, sitting next to Green Lantern on a couch construct. Hal having to give Bruce his ring to will himself out of the knowledge chair is still one of the most hilarious things ever. Also, you can kind of plan for everything if you know everything, so it also gets a bit less interesting on that front narratively as well. This is why, with rare exceptions, this tends to be a fleeting ability, and then the hero is left trying to grasp at all the straws of the knowledge they once had. Also, it tends to be shown as pushing the heroes away from their heroic natures, for knowledge is power and absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
Number 5, Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8. Number 4, Gladiator and Self-Confidence. Cal-Arc, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be, however, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1977's X-Men number 107. Number 3, Daredevil and Loud Noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted, and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises! Number 2, Green Lantern and Wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns, it's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log, and then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940s All-American Comics, number 16. Number 1, Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally, or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
In a 10 long neck. According to comments I've seen on these videos along with my own, it looks like this may be my mutant counterpart. I really don't know why you people were so obsessed with my neck when I first started, both on this channel and our sister channel, but I guess I am long neck. Before the events of M-Day, William Hanover was a mutant with a slightly longer neck than normal. He was a student at Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters and helped Cyclops oppose Zorn's rampage. You had a long neck and you were admitted to the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters? Okay. He first appeared in New X-Men number 140 in June 2003, and there is no other information about him. His power was legit having a long neck, and that's it. Kinda sad, really. I guess Candace from Phineas and Ferb should also be on this list. In at 9, Skin. Angelo Espinosa was born in Los Angeles. His girlfriend became a gang member, which put a strain on their relationship, obviously. And one night his girlfriend and her friends picked up Angelo for a drive, which turned into a drive-by shooting. The stress of this event caused his powers to manifest. He passed out, and when he woke up, the car was on fire and his girlfriend was gone. A homeless man was trying to steal Angelo's wallet while he was unconscious, but Angelo woke up and fled from the car. As he did, the car exploded, killing the homeless man with the wallet on him. The only way they could identify the homeless man was by using that wallet, so Angelo was declared deceased. His power is one of the most absurd I've ever seen. Aside from sounding like a Wizards of Waverly play spell, you know, Humanos by Espinosa. Espinosa had gained an extra 6 feet or so of skin that he can use to extend limbs like a restricted Mr. Fantastic. Skin was later found crucified on the grounds of the school along with other mutants, and despite Archangel's new healing ability, he wasn't able to save him. But like, come on, 6 feet of extra skin? That's dumb. In Innate Maggot. This one has to be the most confusing of the bunch. The kid known as Japeth, if I even said that right, was tortured by terrible stomach pains and required special food. He was told by doctors that his pains were caused by cancer, so in an effort to save his family money on medical treatment, he left his small African village at 12 years old to commit suicide. He ended up being found by Magneto, who helped him uncover the true nature of his pain. 2 slug-like creatures that lived in the boy's guts that acted like his digestive system. After Magneto got revenge for Maggot's father's death, Maggot was horrified by his actions and didn't join Magneto's cause. Sometime later, he ended up seeking out Magneto in an attempt to get him to help Maggot master his power, his slugs. He had named them Eenie and Meanie, and they work as his digestive tract, meaning he will essentially vomit them out and let them hunt. They will find food, eat it, and then return to Maggot, giving him all the nutrients from that food after he's like swallowed them back up. Since Maggot cannot eat proper food on his own. Yeah. It's weird, gross, and disgusting, but oh well. That's why it deserves to be on this list. And it's 7, Ugly John. What kind of name is this? Ugly John? What kind of rude as hell kind of rude ass name is that? I mean, sure, his only ability is having 3 faces that aren't all appealing to look at, but do you really need to put that in a name? You know what? I'm changing his name. My headcanon will forever be just John. You know what? Let's change it right now, alright? And at number 7, John. There. That's better. This guy got captured by the Wild Sentinels and was critically injured, and he was killed by Cyclops in an attempt to end his suffering. Because of the pain, or because of the faces? And at 6, Glob Herman. Look, trained mercenaries or villains know where to shoot or stab you. Some trained individuals know where to stab you to make it look like you're dead but not actually kill you. But it's a general rule of thumb, you know. Shoot to kill, aim to thrill, or aim for the head and right in the chest. Well, what if you had transparent skin so the villains knew exactly where to put each bullet or knife to avoid your bones? Well, there you have Glob Herman's power. His real name being Robert Herman, he probably took one of those memes that's like your stripper name is the color of your shirt and the last dessert you ate, but it was like your superhero name is the last thing you wrote on backwards plus your last name. And boom! Blog backwards Herman was born. Blog backwards is Glob, so. And 5 gold balls. Fabio Medina was a mutant whose powers manifested after the war between the Avengers and X-Men. After he was the victim of a robbery, his powers manifested. Powers that include the ability to produce gold balls from any part of his body. These balls can also vary in size. They emit a poink sound every time they hit a surface and seem to be able to bounce. If that's not weird enough, it was later discovered that the balls that Fabio produces are in fact unfertilized eggs. I'm assuming human eggs because, you know, he's a human, but he's also a male, so it confuses me. He currently goes by Egg after joining the Five, where he helps Kuroko revive dead mutants. I'm assuming he's using these human eggs he produces. A giant human egg flying at you, do you know how terrifying that would be? Does it still have 32 chromosomes? Would a normal-sized swimmer be able to fertilize it? So many hard-hitting questions. And at 4, Zeitgeist. Look, puking is never fun, especially not after binge drinking. But while it may feel like acid in your throat, the stomach acid doesn't really burn through any non-organic material. Well, imagine vomit that may actually end up being able to digest corn. Well, let me introduce you to Zeitgeist, the most common mutant right now because he looks like he's wearing a surgical mask and we all need to be wearing one right now. He would have nightmares about a makeout session gone wrong after he ended up spewing acid vomit on a girl's face during a drunken day at the beach. Yikes, that'll definitely be a downer on your first date. She survived, but the face burn left Axel Clooney wondering if the nightmares would stop if he remembered her name. You ain't remembered her name, buddy. While sure, he may have been the leader of the Ecstatics, this is still such a dumb power to have. When I saw the guy with acid spit in Sky High get classified as a hero, I'm like, what the f***, why? How is acid spit a heroic ability? Sure, super strength, I get it, but acid spit? It's more of a hero support power. This also goes to show that nobody other than the public cares about damages superheroes cause. He literally started burning through the school and he's like, hero! Getting close to the end at number 3, Blob. Fred Duke's power manifested when he reached puberty. His major weaknesses were the same as most humans. Short temper, lack of foresight, lack of intelligence, and easily manipulated self-esteem. Something all humans have. He was depowered in House of M, but before this Blob's blubber was impenetrable. Even Wolverine's claws couldn't slice the dice. He's gone by the aliases of Frederick, Fatso, Tubby, Big Man, Brainless Lumox, and Horseman of Bounty. I'm not like your normal horseman. I'm a load of blubber. He's a rescue. I'm not savable. And at 2, Choir. Irina Clayton is one of the students at the Xavier Institute who assisted then acting headmistress Jean Grey fight against the invading force of Sublime's U-Men. She first appeared in New X-Men number 112 and had her final appearance in the New X-Men number 150, being depowered due to M-Day. During her 3 years as a mutant, she had not 1, not 2, but 3 extra mouths on her neck. These powers enabled her to become the superhero version of Jeff Dunham, using these mouths to talk without moving her lips, thus confusing and disorienting her enemies. Having extra mouths on your neck? Are you kidding me? Confusing your enemies by talking without moving your lips. Really? That's freaking ridiculous. Like, how? Finally, in at number 1, Jazz. There is little to say about Jazz's mutant ability. His superpower, thanks to his mutation, is that he is blue. Yep. John Xander's dream was to be a rapper, but he wasn't very good. While in Mutant Town, he was a drug owner for one of the local crime lords who was selling toad juice, a drug made from the secretions of a mutant called Toad Boy. Even Toad Boy is more useful than Jazz. His only ability other than being blue is his ability to rap at a mediocre level. Same. This guy is nothing special, but what makes me mad about all of this is, and it should make you mad too, is the fact that he kept his powers after M-Day. Yeah, the mutant tag who can decide elections one handshake loses his powers because he isn't useful enough, but the blue-skinned Eminem ripoff is able to keep his powers? No, not even powers, blue skin. He's probably as mad as I am about it, and you should be mad about it too. If he knows about it, that is.
Coming in at number 10 is The Many Lives of Donna Troy. So some of the entries on this list won't be so much about single storylines, but even the stories of some comic book characters in whole, particularly those who seem to have multiple different lives. For example, Donna Troy. Donna, like Wonder Woman, has several different origin stories, but while Diana's many beginnings are pretty similar to one another in a few ways, the story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up. But even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together. She was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Yes, it is very confusing. Just don't pay attention. Number 9. Pax Americana. Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly created the multiversity Pax Americana in 2014, and DC Comics fans were mostly baffled. As part of the multiversity series of books, different universes based on companies purchased by DC Comics were explored in their own stories, but this one focused on Earth 4, which is based on the Charlton Comics heroes of Pax Americana. Hence the name. We saw characters like Peacemaker, The Question, Blue Beetle, all that fun stuff, but in a story that almost seemed like a mirror of the Watchmen story with the Charlton characters standing in. The story was also told basically in reverse, but also not really. Ultimately, it all revolves around the president that formed the Pax Americana and the mystery of whatever happened to America's first crime fighter. It's worth a read for sure, and after the initial read through, when you're confused about what's going on, I would maybe look up a guide on how to read it properly and read it again. Number 8. Jean Grey. While Jean Grey coming back from the Dark Phoenix saga was one of the greatest X-Men moments of all time, it was still just a tiny bit convoluted. Basically, it all kicks off when out in space, the X-Men were bombarded with cosmic radiation. While the other members were incapacitated, Jean Grey towed the line between life and death but managed to return everyone alive by making a sort of pact with the Phoenix Force. She was now much stronger and was reborn as the Phoenix. This led to the Phoenix Saga, where by the end of it, Jean as the Phoenix basically saved the multiverse. Unfortunately, it also eventually led to the Dark Phoenix Saga, which told the story of the fall of Jean Grey to Dark Phoenix thanks to the manipulation of the Hellfire Club, which inadvertently subjected the Phoenix Force to emotional concepts it never experienced before. Jean basically went out and destroyed an entire solar system in her rage at being manipulated. After events with the Shi'ar and the X-Men, Jean sacrificed herself in order to save the universe from the Dark Phoenix she had become and was completely atomized. It was incredibly sad and the story itself was really good, but then, years later in Fantastic Four number 286, it was revealed that Jean Grey had somehow actually been alive this entire time, and the being that actually went through the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas was just the Phoenix Force itself that took on Jean's form. Jean herself was instead placed in a cocoon in Jamaica Bay, which is where she was reborn into the Phoenix originally. This brought the fan favorite character back to life, but devalued the whole Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas for fans and made people hate Jim Shooter, Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time. Number 7. Odyssey. Wonder Woman Odyssey feels almost like a DC Elseworlds story. Like it shouldn't fit into the main timeline, which itself is pretty damn confusing. But it definitely isn't an Elseworlds story. Odyssey was another of DC's attempts to reboot Wonder Woman, erasing all the continuity that had been in the series since Crisis on Infinite Earths, giving us a Diana who had no connection to anyone she had been interacting with for years in the comics. The story it tells isn't too convoluted itself. It drops us into the middle of the action, making it feel like we have missed a good chunk of the story, but it goes on to tell a pretty linear line of storytelling. It's just so disjointed from the rest of pretty much anything else. But then it was basically completely unnecessary because the same year that Odyssey ended, the entire DC universe was rebooted with Flashpoint and the New 52, with nothing about Diana's new reboot being carried over. Number 6. Marvel 1602. Neil Gaiman's Marvel 1602 is one of my favorite comic book stories, but I will admit it can be a little confusing. Basically, to lay it all out, the universe that it takes place in is Earth 311, which actually got its start in in a different alternate reality. On Earth 460, Purple Man used his powers of persuasion to become president for life. In that world, most heroes had been hunted down or had died from old age, but Captain America was one holdout. Unfortunately, he is captured and banished away to Earth 616's 1599, but because he showed up in the world, it inadvertently created Earth 311. For some reason, the presence of Captain America destabilized reality and began the emergence of heroes and villains into this world who are counterparts to many of the present-day heroes and villains of the Marvel 616 universe. We have Count Otto von Doom the Handsome, Witchbreed, aka Mutants, Grand Inquisitor Enrique, aka Magneto, Carlos Javier, aka Charles Xavier, Four from the Fantastic, Sir Nicholas Fury, Peter Parquois, David Banner. These are some of the alternate versions of these characters. Now the story is super interesting, intertwining actual history with superpowered beings, but it's not without its confusing moments, and most of that has to do with how this story's world even came to be.
Up next, number 5, the power of preach. It is undeniable that Captain America is a gifted orator. There's a reason why he's often in a leadership position. Dude is really good at motivating and inspiring people. It's kind of his whole shtick, considering his superhero persona in the first place. Let's quickly count down some of the more inspirational speeches of his over the years. In the MCU, there's the whole Price of Freedom speech in Captain America the Winter Soldier. He gave a powerful speech when turning down the presidency in the comics in Captain America issue 250. He even finds himself filming PSAs for high schools about detention, as seen in the MCU Spider-Man film. And then there's the whole whatever it takes speech in Endgame. Hell, even the Ultimate Universe Cap can give a good speech, although a mildly rude and offensive one. He went on a tangent about how the A on his helmet didn't stand for France after he was advised to surrender. Regardless of what it is he's saying, Cap can command a room and can compel almost anyone's attention with his gift of the gab. Moving on to number 4, super accuracy. Once upon a time in Captain America Comics issue 3, the third issue of his solo series that began in the 40s, Steve Rogers threw a sharp dinosaur bone at a foe and impaled him, murdering him. I mean, it was 1941, so a lot of stuff like this slipped under the radar prior to the Comics Code Authority. Ah, the golden age of comics. Anywho, the story takes place in a museum as Cap and Bucky attempt to stop 2 small-time robbers from thieving. The dude he kills is a guy named Lenny. He's a petty henchman who probably did not deserve to die, especially in that way. Regardless, that is some damn good accuracy, impaling the kid right through the heart with that bone. It's almost impressive if it wasn't so homicidal. Speaking of using objects to kill people, in at number 3, he can get homicidal with a shield. Steve Rogers has quite the bloody track record. Clearly. Aside from using dinosaur bones to impale lowly criminals, he's also used his shield to murder people too. So wholesome. I mean, it is kind of impressive though, isn't it? I mean, sure, it's made of vibranium, but using an object like that effectively to commit homicide is definitely a skill. Right? Right. Anyway, Cap used his shield to help out superhero Union Jack when Jack's brother, Baron Blood, a vampire if the name didn't give it away, went on a rampage. Cap found himself having to permanently take care of the problem by decapitating him with his shield as Union Jack looked on, and as Baron Blood clawed at his chest too, to boot. Moving on to number 2, the Battle Van. You've heard of the Batmobile, the Quinjet, the Hell Cycle. You name it. But have you heard of the Battle Van? Aside from having a bit of a lackluster name, the Battle Van is more commonly known as Captain America's van, which isn't much better, is it? A product of the 80s, this rad custom-built van, a Chevy nonetheless, was a nondescript vehicle designed by Wakandans for Cap. I mean, I get it, it's really good when you're trying to be low-key, but it kinda looks like he just stole the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo and then spray painted it one color to avoid getting caught. Those dang kids. The van can actually change colors, might I add, but whatever. It can basically function as a base on the go for Cap. It has a mount for his motorcycle at the back because, you know, one vehicle wasn't enough, and even has a little cot if he feels like nap time. Oh. It is worth noting that an alternate reality version of Cap from Earth 600043 actually uses this van religiously, which is pretty great. And finally, in at number 1, he cannot get drunk. Because of Cap's incredibly fast metabolism, thanks to the Super Soldier Serum, he has an immunity to a lot of things. The serum prevents the buildup of fatigue poisons in his muscles, his body is resistant to gases and hypnosis like we mentioned, and he has an immunity to alcohol, meaning he can never get drunk. Often his resistance to alcohol is played up as a joke in the comics or his cinematic appearances, but in a way, that kinda sucks, doesn't it? I mean, not saying that you need to get drunk at a party to have fun, but having the option to choose would be nice at least. He's not the only superhero who suffers from this ailment either. Deadpool has a similar problem thanks to his boosted regenerative healing factor.
Number 10, playing sports with himself. So the Flash will sometimes use his abilities to entertain others. And well, sometimes that can get a little silly. So in the story The Flash of Two Worlds from 1961, the Flash ends up visiting Earth 2, and he meets the Golden Age Flash. This is after he vibrates his molecules in a way that he has never done before, hence introducing the world to the concept of the multiverse in comics, something that would change everything. That's all legit. What we're here to talk about is how at an orphan's benefit at the start of the story, before he vanishes, he entertains an auditorium full of kids by playing tennis with himself. Now, of course the Flash could do this, but how entertaining for the kids would it be? Wouldn't he be moving too fast to really see? It would be like that race from The Boys, just over in a blip. But you're just glad to be there, cause The Flash, hooray. Number 9. The Flash can change his appearance. So this is an ability that the Flash used in the Silver Age, so we're talking about Barry Allen, as he is the Silver Age Flash. He used to be able to reshape his molecules, cause super speed. And he would even be able to reshape and mold his face like putty, which was a very useful ability, but one that kinda takes him outside his whole speed gimmick. Fastest man alive, also able to move his face. A hero who can look like anyone to infiltrate areas is a much different vibe than someone who's just super fast. Also, that type of ability tends to be more applied to villains, since it is more clandestine, and that can more easily be used for villainy. Superman was also able to do this at one point, but only on a rare occurrence. The Silver Age was like this though. The idea of extended continuity that included everything, so you would have to, branch them all together, well, that was coming and still being developed. So you would have a bunch of one-shot powers that happen once and never again. Number 8. Throwing lightning. So the Flash, Barry Allen, and Wally West initially got their powers by being struck by lightning and covered in chemicals. Take that, Jay Garrick and Hard Water. Lightning has always been a part of the Flash's motif though, down to his very costume. And later, as more and more of the Speed Force was revealed, a lot of it would manifest in a way very similar to lightning, or just as lightning. So it was that Wally 2, Wallace West, the Wally of the New 52 and beyond, when they erased first Wally because Dan Didio hates him, he would be able to harness that energy of the Speed Force and push it out through his hands as lightning. Now, this was a more controversial ability, because it's essentially energy powers, and again, that's a bit outside the wheelhouse of being the fastest. I mean, you're already fast, and you get to throw energy to boot on top of all of that? That's a lot. For some, it was too much. Also, for some, anything Wallace did was too much. Poor Wally too. He's okay. His introduction to the DC Universe was rough. Who greenlit that? But so is a lot of the New 52. Number 7. Fast Talker. The Flash, if he forgets, will talk at the same pace he thinks, which is incredibly fast. In fact, he can talk at a speed so fast he can only be understood by other speedsters. Now, the fast talking is a cute character trait, and it makes sense. But it also raises a very depressing conundrum, the likes of which is explored by songs such as The Ballad of Barry Allen. And that is the Flash okay? The Flash is such a happy, well-adjusted hero, but this ability really makes you think, how slow must everybody else seem to him? How does he stand it without snapping? And how does he form meaningful connections when he could have finished a whole conversation while you're just finishing a sentence? It also feels like he would constantly have to be thinking about this. You would think he would forget this more often. Then you start to think, should he come across as more jittery? Cause even a slight movement from him would come across like a really quick jerk to somebody else. Just us regular slow folks. See, it's opened up a whole other world and it's kinda sad. Number 6. Mimicking voices. Staying on the path of voices, the Flash can vibrate his vocal cords to the point where he can sound like absolutely anybody. Now this would be an extremely useful ability, and it's one that if you extrapolate, yeah, it makes sense I guess. However, why wouldn't he use this all the time? It would be an advantage in so many situations, confuse enemies and allies alike. And that's the thing. It's too good. This ability, like some of the others, is a huge advantage, and also a little more on the villainous side of things. Still, this is an ability I would actually like to see more of, and I'm not averse to a darker Barry. It's just hilarious when Grant Gustin tries to do it. Floppy emo hair. Number 5. Expert Folder. Okay, this is never overtly stated, but think about it. For years, the Flash has kept his costume inside a ring and then shoots it out and changes into it at super speed. This is when he needs it, but how does he get it back inside the ring? Because he does. And this usually joke, oh, he can. But you know what? No. Super folder. Super speed expert folder. They say that the costume is sucked back into the ring by special gas when the ring is opened. Okay. Sure, Jan. Just admit it, he folds it super fast where no one can see. He just has a really impractical method of storing it. You're the Flash, you could just keep it anywhere and run and change into it and still be back in time to stop whatever crime is happening. We believe in you. Number 4. Speed Scout duplicates. So the Flash can create duplicates of himself that he can send forward and back in time. Sometimes they're duplicates, sometimes they're versions of himself from a few seconds or minutes in the past or future. Either way, it gets weird if you think about it too hard. Communicating with yourself a minute or two from now and then telling yourself what to do, it just seems disconcerting. And how do the timeline effects ripple out? Is this how the universe ends? Barry telling his past self to remember to buy milk so he can have cereal when he gets home? Barry would totally have cereal for dinner. You know it. When you start dealing with time travel and Barry, it can get messy, especially since he doesn't need his fancy treadmill anymore. I miss the cosmic exercise equipment. It still pops up here and there, but they take it far too seriously. Number 3. One punch. So the Flash can use his speed and the Speed Force to amplify a bunch of abilities. So he can also channel this speed and energy into one mega meta powered punch. A dangerous, potentially life-ending blow that is supposedly guaranteed to end most average villains. Not kill them, just end the fight. Even if they are metas themselves. Sometimes people call this the ultimate punch. And well, it's very much maybe a one-hit KO type deal, or a we need the big guns kind of deal, so it doesn't happen too often. But when it does, it raises the question. So can't he just channel the energy into himself and be all around stronger, kind of on average? See, sometimes a less than stellar power makes you question the character's other abilities. Also, the fact that the Flash isn't the strongest is part of what makes him interesting, because he needs to find other solutions for his extremely strong foes. Number 2. Constructs. Now when you hear the word constructs, your mind may go, oh, Green Lantern. But no, by using the Speed Force, the Flash too can create solid constructs and objects. Objects he can then use. How does he do this? Well, fans are still arguing about it, bandying about terms like speed and light, and if we got them at the right vibrational speed, sure, it could be solid. While others say, why could he be able to do that? That's too much power. Now the Flash phasing through things, legit, but then turning around and making things solid, is it supposed to be because they were intangible? And vibrating them into phase? Maybe. I mean, I guess if we don't get too deep, which is fine, nobody should be learning their science from the comic book universe. And if media can still tell the world that you only use part of the percentage of your brain, then the Flash can make things solid. That's the deal. Because that's not true. Number 1. Strength Force. This gem comes to us from the Rebirth era of the Flash and introduces us to the concept of the Strength Force. So in the Flash number 53, the Flash is infused with the Strength Force. And then we got to experience really jacked up Hulkberry in 54. And yeah, it definitely is an experience. There's a bunch of monologuing about how different the Strength Force is. It's different than the Speed Force, it's heavier. He also uses it to talk about how he can't just think his way out of every situation, despite how fast he's able to think. The Strength Force is ludicrous, and they try to make more of it than just roids, because Barry is all, it's more than just muscles, I can control gravity, because he's so dense. Thankfully, this is very short-lived, and he shrinks back down to regular Barry Allen. But the Strength Force was definitely deserving of our number 1, because it makes you question everything.
Number 10, No Man's Land. Speaking of Batman, in 1999 we were given the infamous No Man's Land arc. In this story, Gotham is struck by a massive earthquake and is cut off from the rest of the country. The government writes the city off as a lost cause, and the various villains form gangs and begin taking over areas of the city and claiming it as their territory. Batman has to work to bring order back to the city by working with his fellow local heroes as well as the GCPD. The concept seems simple enough, but what can make the story kind of convoluted is its sheer scale. No Man's Land was the most ambitious crossover in DC history, requiring the writers to develop maps and charts to keep track of where everyone was at any given time. The story was told across all of the Batman and Bat Family titles, such as Batman, Detective Comics, Shadow of the Bat, Legends of the Dark Knight, Robin, Catwoman, and Nightwing. The story spans over 100 issues of comics, making keeping up with the story when it came out an expensive and difficult to keep track of endeavor. Number 9, Crisis on Infinite Earths. By today's standards, Crisis on Infinite Earths isn't too convoluted. I mean, we're used to getting a crisis event every few years from DC, but the original is worth talking about. By 1986, the DC multiverse had gotten so convoluted that editorial decided that they needed a way to streamline continuity. The story is almost a last hurrah for the convoluted original continuity, with multiple versions of characters coming together to save the universe. As a result, there is a lot of people and storylines to keep track of before the multiverse is eventually destroyed destroyed, leaving only one Earth with all of the histories either being erased or combined. It's convoluted, but with the goal of becoming less convoluted by its end, which is a noble enough goal. Number 8. Green Lantern is difficult to start reading. I'm gonna be brief with this one, and it's more of a personal one. I really like the concept of the Green Lanterns, but every time I try and read any of their stories, I get confused. There are way too many members of the team who you are expected to follow, and then when you finally figure that out, you learn about the yellow, red, blue, and orange lanterns, each with a different emotional spectrum. Add to that the Guardians of the Universe and the central power battery containing a demon named Parallax who makes them unable to affect the color yellow, and there's just a lot to keep track of. I hear that a lot of their stories are really good, but their history is so convoluted and there is so much homework involved in understanding the lore that it makes Green Lantern a really intimidating title to pick up. Number 7. Superman's continuity. For decades, Superman operated in the New Earth continuity. This is the Superman who showed up in 1986, had the Death and Return arc, married Lois Lane, and had all those classic adventures. In 2011, DC rebooted into the New 52, featuring a different Superman who hadn't had those adventures and was dating Wonder Woman and all that stuff. It was different but easy enough to follow because it was a different continuity. Then, one day, things got weird, and the New Earth Superman showed up right as the New 52 Superman was dying, revealing that he had been transported to this universe with his Lois years prior along with their son John, and had been hiding out the whole time. So, he became the new old Superman. So we had New 52 heroes except Superman, who was the New Earth version. Eventually, to try and retcon this a bit, it was revealed that the two different Supermen were actually two halves of the real Superman. They merged into one person, thus combining their continuities. This was Rebirth era, where everyone was getting their continuities mixed a bit, but just when this was getting figured out, we got Infinite Frontier, where everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, this might be the most controversial thing I've ever said on this channel, but this stuff with Superman is a prime example of why canon is extremely overrated. Number 6. The X-Men, Marvel's most notoriously convoluted series. Despite their reputation, you can pick up an X-Men comic and start reading and not be too lost. But there is a lot going on that makes the story of the team difficult to keep a handle on. Besides the massive cast of characters who each have ridiculously intricate family trees, there are cosmic forces like the Phoenix Force to keep track of. Characters like Cable who are coming in from alternate timelines. And just when you figure all that out, everyone moves to a living island that the bad mutants are put into a weird mental prison in. Individual arcs are okay to get into, but if you look at the story of the X-Men as a whole, it is hard to deny that they have a pretty convoluted history. Speaking of the X-Men.
Moving on to number 5, invisibility. Sort of. The control over the electromagnetic spectrum gives Magneto the ability to become invisible. While it's kind of scientifically questionable in the real world because of Magneto's control over electromagnetic pulses, and that the extent of his powers reach all the way down to photons, he can basically turn invisible by warping visible light around his body. This is something he does in Vision and the Scarlet Witch issue 4 from 1983, and you guessed it, never really exhibited this ability much after that. Wonder why? So in other words, he's able to make it look like he's invisible. It's more of an eye trick than anything else. But you can definitely imagine how that would come in handy. And at number 4, astral projection. Okay, so I feel like everyone and their grandma in the Marvel Universe can astral project. Hulk can astral project. Every single mutant with some amount of psychic ability can astral project. And of course, Magneto can astral project. This has been chopped up to his grand mental power and will. And electromagnetic abilities, of course. In X-Men Volume 1, Issue 6, Magneto and his rival Charles Xavier come across Namor and are trying to figure out whether the Submariner is a mutant or not. Magneto wants to recruit him to the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. The comic literally begins with both men separately contemplating whether or not Namor is a mutant, which is kind of hilarious. Anyway, Magneto gives the recruitment efforts a go by astral projecting to travel under the ocean. Convenient. Xavier also astral projects and of course runs into Magneto's astral projection and shenanigans occur. Kinda sounds like the setup to a sitcom episode, doesn't it? Anyway, all that comes of it is Namor is like, I'm impressed by your lair, Magneto, but then is like, yikes, you're an Magneto, and after a kerfuffle he retreats back to the ocean. Magneto's astral projection powers kind of disappeared after that, but later returned in X-Men The Hidden Years after Magneto found himself in a bit of a pickle. So he astral projected in a scheme to trick people into thinking that he was dead and the projection was actually his ghost, using this as a means of having others attack the X-Men for him. Smart fella. And at number 3, he can create wormholes. Haha, this sounds like something more aligned to a cosmic hero, doesn't it? But in fact, it is something that Magneto can do. Wormhole creation. So this is another product of Magneto's ability to mess with electromagnetic fields. During the Avengers Disassembled storyline and in the Excalibur comics, we've seen Eric pull off this trick when he needed to travel between Genosha and New York. The former situation being when he needed to grab Scarlet Witch real quick when her life was threatened. Convenient way of having a character travel around, isn't it? Plot devicey, no? Some have argued that perhaps this occurred in Avengers Disassembled thanks to Wanda's powers, but Girl was pretty out of it when he picked her up and brought her through that wormhole. It also closed when he got back, so it's implied that this was something of his doing, not hers, although it could better fit under her roster of skills. Regardless, because of this little ability he's exhibited, we've had to put our next number on this list. In at number 2, travel to alternate universes. What? Okay, so there's a big old theory kicking around the interwebs about how the X-Men will be integrated into the MCU, and it's all based off of Magneto's ability to create wormholes and use them for travel. The theory suggests that Magneto's wormhole creation abilities should allow him to travel between dimensions or alternate realities, and this is how the mutants that Marvel Studios wants to carry over from the Fox franchises will find themselves in the MCU. Personally, we think that is kind of a bit of a long shot. Plus, think of the repercussions. If Magneto in the comics is able to travel between alternate realities, that could stir up a whole lot of trouble for our heroes, or at least it could have in the past prior to their Dawn of X allegiance. Now if you guys are out of the loop on the recent X-Men comics, we definitely suggest you catch up, or just check out one of our videos on the rebooted series, they're fun. But hey, maybe now's the time that Magneto could really bust out this power and f*** up the Marvel Universe in the comics. Who knows? And finally, in at number 1, my personal favorite, a magnetic personality. This is by far the dumbest power Magneto has ever had, and arguably the only power on this list that definitely fits into the definition of dumb. We've talked about it before on our channel and a few other lists, so in case you're not privy to it, here's the lowdown. Once upon a time, Magneto was given the power of a magnetic personality. You can't make that kind of shit up, friends. In Volume 1, Issue 18 of X-Men, Magneto shows off a new power, courtesy of Stan Lee might I add, in which he announces, I quote, "Gaze into my eyes, now you cannot turn away, you are held by magnetic attraction." Now if you're scratching your head in confusion at that, that is a perfectly sound reaction to have. Essentially this was an early days power of his that popped up just the once that allowed Magneto control over people's minds in an almost hypnotic sense, and it never came up again. To be fair, he wasn't really great at using it. In this first instance, he tries to probe the mind of the Blob, but fails to do so, claiming that there's a mental block in the way. Right, sure, maybe you just like the way that magnetic attraction sounded.
Number 10, temperature resistance. The crazy thing about this power isn't so much that it exists, but that it appears to have always existed. Even before Beast had his iconic fur, he was resistant to cold. A fur coat makes sense for this, but his randomly being cold resistant doesn't really make a ton of sense without it. Although this is also back when Beast had an insane healing factor and could heal from almost any injury, similar to Wolverine or Deadpool. A temperature resistance makes sense for a furry character who would be insulated, or even a character who I guess is known for their endurance. However, the weird carryover of this power as Beast has changed over the time, from having a healing factor to a blue fur coat, is just kinda strange. Number 9, magic. In the 2016 series of All New X-Men, we see Hank turn from scientific pursuits to those of a more magical variety. What makes this fairly silly is his sort of resentment and disbelief surrounding magic, as he specifically attempts to use magics himself. It was a weird exploration of his character when writers decided to incorporate a bit of magic into his world, as Hank has always been known as a man of books, and maybe of fantasy in a more romantic or literary sense, but certainly not in a magical superpower sense, so... Number 8, handy feet. One of the powers that I've always found to be both silly and useful is Beast's enhanced dexterity. He can use this skill in combat to turn himself into a skilled acrobat, dodging blows, stealthily leaping across rooms, gracefully landing where he is needed, and helping in the fray to defeat the enemy. But he can also use this skill to perform mental tasks with his feet. Why? Well, usually because he's busy reading. He's used his feet to type, pour liquids out of beakers, and even once used them alone to fight as he was trying to read during the instigation. How one could truly focus on both, I can't even comprehend. I guess because of his enhanced intellect? Or maybe he was just like me when I try to multitask while reading, and he's just stuck reading the same sentence over and over and over without it sinking in. But maybe he just didn't want to admit that. So it looks like he's reading, but really he's just reading the same sentence. Number 7, telepathic resistance. The weird thing about this power is that it never seems to be fully explained. Some mutants train to get this, and others just seem to possess a natural resistance to telepathy. Beast appears to fall more into the second category, cause you know, you can't be an X-Men unless you have some level of telepathic resistance. However, Beast's resistance to telepathy is kind of dumb because, well, he's not that great at it. It basically just means he is not openly vulnerable to telepathic influence, but when up against a powerful or potent telepath, or if someone can use his fears, like Cassandra Nova did against Beast, his resistance quickly breaks down. So this power is kind of a dumb one because it's just, well, it's not that useful. And after all, the X-Men are more often dealing with powerful telepaths than low-level ones, so. Number 6. Giant hands and feet. Originally, Beast started out as a normal-ish looking man, simply having large hands and feet, which he was ridiculed for in school, so I guess it's not completely normal. Visibly, this appeared to be the only super thing about him. Granted, he was also super strong, super agile, and speedy at the time as well. He also had that advanced intellect that we love. But while looking mostly normal, this weird feature that seemed to come along with his mutation and powers was an odd one. Namely because other mutants with similar enhancements to speed and strength and agility don't really seem to share it. They don't really have, like, large hands or large feet. I know not all mutants are the same, trust me, do I know that, but still, it was a weird trait to give Beast, especially when you would expect someone with large hands and feet to be, you know, more clumsy than dexterous. Yet Marvel decided to go the opposite way with it. Number 5. Doesn't need to sleep. Apparently, having his form change from ape-like to more feline-like not only stole a digit from Beast's hands, but also changed his sleeping patterns. He mentions this during Astonishing X-Men Volume 1, Issue 25. The issue starts off with Beast singing, and we follow him until he runs into Xavier Institute student Armor, aka Hisako Ichiki. She reminds him of her threat to shave Japanese obscenities into his fur while he sleeps if she caught him singing again, which obviously she has. Hank answers the threat by sharing with Hisako that he no longer really needs more than 2 hours of sleep a night. What? This might be a useful one for being pulled into a fight in the middle of the night or needing to keep watch, but it also just seems like such a random superpower to have as a byproduct of an outward change of physical appearance. Yeah, that's right, Beast micronaps apparently. He's got some small sleeping skills. Strange. Especially considering many cats that I've interacted with seem to be pretty sleepy creatures, so this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Number 4. Minor pheromone manipulation. Sometimes heroes have powers that we really get to see in action, and these are the powers that always blow me away. For Hank, one such power is his ability to secrete pheromones which make members of the opposite sex become attracted to him. While it has been mentioned in a copy of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe X-Men edition from 2004, we have yet to see Hank really utilize it. He has had a fairly active love life, and Abigail Brand, who has been a longtime love of his, has even expressed an interest in starting a family, but it's more likely that it is simply Beast's personality and soft blue fur that have caused women to just fall for him, not his use of pheromone power. Unless there's something we don't know, and Beast is maybe just like a master manipulator. He's just secreting pheromones all the time and that's why it all happens. Oh my goodness. I'm not ready for that revelation. It'd be weird. Number 3. Secondary mutation. This is apparently the power and ability that we have to blame, which has caused Hank so many changes over the years. He developed a secondary mutation as a result of consuming his serum, which he sought to protect from being stolen, and this caused him to mutate more, and caused him to enhance his mutation permanently. Long term, it is suspected that this has continued to affect the evolution of his mutation, causing him actually to also continue to change and awakening within Hank recessive genes in his DNA, which have caused him to revert to a more animal-like appearance. He's like a two-way evolution, embodying the strengths of those we evolved from and the advancements of the modern man, shown by his advanced intellect. This becomes in and of itself a little bit silly, though, when you realize that it means he went from ape to cat because of this. So I guess who knows where to next, because I would think, you know, maybe cat then ape. Ape is like all the way at the back, right? I don't know. Someone that studied evolution, let us know in the comments. Number 2. Claws and fangs. This addition to Beast's physique definitely makes sense as it came with the change of his appearance into a more beast-like and ape-like state. But it's still, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. Mostly because Beast doesn't really use either of these things. The juxtaposition of his calm and curious nature with his beast-like physique and features makes a lot of Beast-related powers and assets feel kind of misplaced. Or I guess just wasted, because he doesn't really like to connect with them or utilize them that much. The same can be said about his long claws and features, which typically end up as just ornamental and used by writers to make Beast feel like even more of an outcast than he already does. Which is sad. I want him to just feel good about his appearance. I guess sometimes he does, but sometimes he doesn't. And he wants to like cure himself, and I'm like, no, I'm conflicted. Number 1, animal instinct. Hank might view this trait as a weakness, oddly enough, but I would argue that it's not a weakness because it makes him stronger. It makes him do things he would not normally think to do. It makes him hesitate less. He would likely be able to apprehend more villains than not, catching them off guard with his sheer strength and speed and focus. I mean, he also might kill them, but they'd be stopped at least. But Hank fears his animal side, which alienates him from it and causes any instincts he taps into to be rebuked as opposed to embraced. Really, I think he just needs to take a page out of Wolverine's book, tap into his instincts, and let go a little bit more. Facing his fears would only make him stronger, I think, and eventually give him more control over a power that could be better utilized.
Number 10. Pink elephants. Now of course I have to start off with one of the most wild issues. It's titled Pink Elephants. It's issue 212 of Green Lantern Corps, but don't let the name fool you, there's no weird elephant stuff in this one per se. So we have Hal Jordan, and he's being eyed down by Aricia Rabb. See, the only thing is, Aricia is only 13 years old. Young love, classic. Way too young though, way too young. Hal Jordan is of course not 13. So she uses her power ring to make herself appear older, but it's still not okay, you know? You know, that's like 13 going on 30, but Hal Jordan knows that it's actually her and she's making herself look older. That's gross, that's super gross, and also super illegal. Ayo, Aricia's like, oh, I love you because you're the most handsomest man I've ever met, and because you treated me as a real Green Lantern even though I was so young, and because you couldn't keep from calling me honey. And even Hal Jordan's like, oh, okay, I didn't say, let's stop there, let's just chill. Don't say it out loud, please. Gross. Even saying it out loud here is just, yuck. Number 9, Bat Baby. Issue 147 of Batman has one of the funniest lines on a comic book title page ever. So we have Robin, just regular old Robin, and a baby sporting the mask and the cowl, and the businessman on the cover is like, look out, it's Bat Baby and Robin. Like, I love the stutter that he does too. He's like, look out, it's Bat Baby. Like, he's kind of like has to take a second to realize what he's looking at, which is kind of like us too. We're looking at the thing like, it's a Bat Baby, I guess. Yeah, debit, let's do it. And the weirdest part is, he still has the abilities of a full-grown Batman. So Batman and Robin get up close to Nails Finney and his gang, and then Batman sees Garth, the renegade scientist. Garth! Turns out Nails brought them into a trap, and now Batman has shrunk down to the size of a small child. Very small. The headlines were amazing in the news that week. Gangland turns Batman into baby, and the photo is just Batman all moody, like, it's the best. Robin at one point even has to carry Batman to the Batmobile. So what does Batman do? He embraces it. He's like, fine, I'll dress like a baby, I'll become Bat Baby, let's do it. He does well though, or he does okay rather. One of the headlines that you see next reads, Bat Baby does okay for a kid. That's it? Just okay? Like, I mean, he's okay. He just rode a balloon up in the air like 40 feet and then fought off 3 crooks, but he did okay for a kid. He was okay for a kid. Yeah, he had to ride a balloon because his legs were so small. I don't think we'll ever get this comic on the big screen, but who knows? I mean, we got Scott Lang as a baby in the last Avengers. Maybe DC will really go for it and have a Bat Baby make a brief cameo. We're hoping. And number 8, Bat Witch. This one's a classic. Released in 1969, issue 186 of The World's Finest, we find Batman in a bit of an odd situation. So, Superman and Batman at this point have traveled back in time to solve a mystery of a broken bust that resembled Batman. They're like, alright, let's go back in time, figure this out. So they go back and they rescue a lady named Sylvia Ward. Now, Sylvia was actually accused of witchcraft, and she's in trouble. So Superman helps her stay afloat, and then Batman swims beside her to shore, right? What a good team. 2 nice guys, classic. And then she thanks Batman by kissing him right on the lips. Ooh-wee. And then Superman goes to introduce himself, and then Batman interrupts and takes her to the local bar. Oh, shit. So Superman decides to use this era in his favor. So he dresses up as Batman and starts like floating around and doing like all like this crazy witch stuff. So much so that the town deems him a witch. So Batman is about to be burned at the stake. He's got like his hands and his head, he's stuck in the whole scenario. And then a thunderstorm rolls in and everyone's like, ah, is it raining? Can't be doing any of that. And then they leave. They don't want to see a guy dressed like a bat like get killed. They think he's a witch, but they're like, you know what? I didn't bring my umbrella, so can't do it this time. Next time. We'll get him next time. Let's head out. Everybody leaves except for, you guessed it, Ben Franklin. Yeah, he was there. He actually tried to help free Batman with one of his experiments, you know? But Superman doesn't let that happen. He puts his hand in and stops the electricity. So Ben Franklin thought that he could use electricity to like blast open the shackles. Not today, not with Supes involved. Eventually Ben Franklin's like, all right, you're on your own. I don't know what's going on here. And then when Batman asks Superman why he's doing this, Superman says, figure it out yourself. So next time your friends start flirting with your crush, just frame them for witchcraft. It'll work, trust me. Number 7, monkey business. We go now to Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Volume 1, Issue 116 to be exact. This issue came out in 1968 and I don't think we'll ever see this on the big screen. I hope so, because if we do, I'm walking out of that big screen. The cover alone is enough. It shows Superman flying, saying, Jimmy, what's gotten into you? Why are you acting like an ape? And then the actual ape on the cover is like, because he's an ape, Superman, yeah, I'm the real Jimmy Olsen. We switched bodies. Yeah, they switched bodies. Apes are so strong also. Like, have you seen Planet of the Apes? Caesar just like rocks dudes off of buildings like it's no problem. There's no way he would be holding a camera. That camera would explode in his hands in a matter of seconds. Like, they're so strong. So after a malfunction of a machine, yep, they ended up switching bodies. So Jimmy Olsen's body starts, of course, literally screaming like an ape because the ape is stuck inside. And the real Jimmy Olsen, he's stuck in an ape body. And the dude, he just embraces it. He buys a green suit, he even has a cool hat to go along with it, and he continues working. Like, what a champ. He even says he'll be a simian sensation. The guy loves it. Editors, insert link. So of course somebody walks into the office and they're like, holy shit, there's a gorilla. We have to call the zoo guards right now. This can't be in here. And then Jimmy responds with puns. He's like, holy cow, I guess I'll have to explain what this monkey business is all about. Like they're gonna be like, ha, good one, Jimmy. No, like that happened in real life. That dude would be put to sleep with a dart so fast. Number 6, Orca the Whale Woman. Imagine if when Robert Pattinson's Batman came out, this was the story that we got. I would laugh so hard. So we go now to Batman issue 579. So imagine you're on a yacht, you're just chilling, right? You're hanging with your friends, having some drinks, feeling good, looking good, showing off your fancy $6 million necklace, and then bam, a whale woman just blasts into frame and rips it away. She's like, don't let her, give me that necklace. Like, first of all, so scared. Bruce is shocked. He's like, miss, can you please return that gem to its rightful owner? That'd be great, thanks. And of course the whale doesn't cooperate, so Bruce heads to the Gotham Aquarium to ask some questions. He meets Grace Boleen, who is a woman bound to a wheelchair who works at the aquarium. She gives the whole rundown on orcas and how they fight other whales that are 3 times the size of them, and how she's working on this research project with orcas, but the funding, of course, is not going well. So you probably figured out what's going on by this point. She spends her time robbing from the rich, and instead of keeping that wealth for herself, she donates it to charities. Not a bad idea. She ends up becoming an orca forever, but that doesn't last long, don't worry. She's killed by an operation ran by the Great White Shark in Detective Comics issue 819. A lot of sea drama in that one. Under the sea, we have a lot of murder, under the sea. No dancing crab choreography included. Number 5, the Suicide Snare. This issue was released with Action Comics Volume 1, issue number 592, back in 1987. The cover of the issue, first of all, is enough to draw you in. It shows Superman with Big Barda, like, you know, with her. They're making out, and who's in the background? Mr. Miracle, just watching the whole thing. He even says the line, Superman and my wife? Those lines are laid across the cover, so what's going on? Well, Mr. Miracle goes home one day to find Darkseid just chilling on his couch, immediately asking where Barda is. Darkseid gives him a tape to play, which may be the scariest moment of my life. Like if Darkseid was like, here's a tape, I'd be like, no, I don't have a tape player. What did you do? What did you do? Oh God, it's gonna be so bad. So he clicks play and sees Big Barda dancing for Sleaze. They don't show it, but it's implied that it's sexual in nature, like, you know. So Sleaze takes mind control Barda and Superman to an adult film director. Yeah, his name is even Grossman, like gross man. Grossman. His idea is that the adult film is going to make so much money that basically it can pay for an army to go against Darkseid, which is a pretty, worth a shot. So in comes Mr. Miracle to save the day, releasing the two from Sleaze's mind control. Whew, that would have been a real awkward brunch if Mr. Miracle didn't show up. Quite the miracle if you ask me. Number 4, Super Lion. This 1958 Actions comic grabbed readers' attention in the 243rd issue when the title page showed Superman as a lion, and the headline was The Lady and the Lion. So you have to open it, you just have to. So after Superman uses his telescopic vision, he sees trouble. Trouble in the form of a young lady on a Mediterranean island in danger during an earthquake. So Superman flies over and saves the day. He soon realizes by the rubble that this is the Temple of Circe. So it wasn't actually Circe, it was the next rendition of Circe. And she ends up making him consume this potion while demanding him to marry her. Nice pitch, not bad. If you do not come back to me for the antidote before the next dawn, she continues, you will turn into the creature you most resemble by nature. See, if that was me, I'd turn into like a toad or like a little turtle or something. Something just kind of like, something not the best. So as fate has it, Superman becomes a lion. Yeah, his lion's heart and strength made him do the whole spiel. It could be a lot worse though. The Man of Steel ends up working at the zoo and he ends up playing with people. Like, he has a pretty good time. Really dumb concept or best idea ever? I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle. Let us know in the comments. Would you see this in theaters? Superman as a lion, just like putting people's heads in his mouth? Let us know, I kind of would. Number 3, Superman vs. Muhammad Ali. You gotta love it. This one shot made its debut back in 1978, written by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. It featured the Man of Steel and of course, Muhammad Ali. So what's going on? How is this a real thing? Well, it was part of an all-new collector's edition numbered C56. So basically this alien named Ratlar, who is part of a species known as the Scrub, visits Earth and demands that we pick our best fighter to go against theirs. Nice. So their best fighter being a behemoth named Hunya. And if we refuse, well, the Scrub is just gonna destroy the planet. So Muhammad Ali argues that since Superman isn't technically from Earth, he must be the one who fights. So Ratlar is amused by this, so he wants to know who's the best. So he pins up the two champs against each other, Superman versus Muhammad Ali. Now of course you're thinking Superman would toast this guy, hands down, no competition. Well, the fight is set to take place on Bodeas, which is orbiting a red star, so that means there's no powers for Superman. So Muhammad Ali trains Superman to become a boxer, like a human boxer, and cue the Rocky Balboa music. So they start training in Superman's Fortress of Solitude, throwing proper left hooks, the whole thing. Might as well train without powers, right? So the unlikely duo are given 24 hours to train, which is just unreasonable. But by using a time warping device, they're able to train for a couple of months. Ratlar figures out the device is being used and boom, training is over, boys, nice try. So the fight is broadcasted intergalactically and thousands tune in naturally. Superman puts up a good fight, but ultimately Ali is the greatest boxer to ever live. So Supes goes down. And now Ali has to fight Hunya, even predicting which round he'll go down by. Now of course Ali doesn't hold up too well against an alien at first, but he eventually knocks him out of the ring in the 4th round, just as he said. Take that, bucko. Boom! Number 2, Ants. Yeah, Ants. Coming at you from Action Comic Volume 1, Issue 296, The Invasion of Ants. It's as dumb as it sounds, or maybe brilliant, I can't tell. The cover alone is super weird and kind of inviting. It shows Superman on the side of a building, but he's got like an ant's head. So off the bat, I'm pretty curious what the hell's going on. He's even saying the words, follow me, soldier ants, buzz buzz buzz, we must capture Lois Lane, buzz buzz, she will be our queen. Okay, you got it, man. So after a colony of giant ants was mutated from a nuclear war on another planet, they decided to come check out Earth. So Superman uses red kryptonite radiation to give himself an ant's head. Not a mask, important to say, like a head. He has an ant's head. He's got an ant's head, guys. And he communicates with them with that head. This is like the ultimate amalgam character. Like, Superman even explains how bad this could get if murder ants roamed the city, as if we didn't already know. It even has a photo of ants like lifting up the Empire State Building and like, so as long as Superman focuses on maintaining an ant's head, he can communicate with it. Similar to how Krypto turned into a collie. If this was a live action movie, people would light the theater on fire. There's no way he's like, buzz, buzz, buzz. Everyone's like, no, I'm leaving. You weren't ready. We're not ready for this. And finally coming in at number 1, the New Guardians. So back in 1988, DC had a short run with one of the best villains ever, Snowflame. So what makes Snowflame so strong and wild is, this guy even says the words, "Is my God," on the first page. The New Guardians have trouble. Of course they have trouble. His every cell burns with white hot ecstasy. In his words, not mine. Ram attacks and it doesn't do much. A blow like that would have sent an ordinary man reeling, says Snowflame. Would it be funny if he was like, a blow like that can't work against a man on blow, and it was like, and just rocked him. Yeah, he even says the more you fight back, the more you fan the fires of my high. This is a real thing. I mean, this could be a live action movie. Just like an old jack dude on coke, just boxing the Justice League.
Number 10, Martian Manhunter and fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America, number 255. Number 9, The Flash and being too fast. At first, I've gotta say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of The Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8, Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which in her defense would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5. Number 7, Adam Strange and Forced Deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in Mystery in Space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Ran's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, The Iranians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6. Number 6, Human Torch and Asbestos. Now don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm aka the Human Torch is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe to toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1.
Number 5, organ rearrangement. Now this is great in battle. Someone's going in for a kill shot, just relocate your heart or whatever needs to be relocated because, you know, they're coming at you. But the question is, how quickly does this happen? Is this organ teleportation or more like the slow, progressive slog of it through your body? Can you feel it? That'd be really gross if you could. However, when else do you need this? I mean, aside from pranking purposes, terrify your friends and family. Where's your heart? How are you alive? Surprise, ma, I'm a mutant. The thing for characters who have this ability is it usually isn't brought up until absolutely necessary, so you can get a bit of Deus Ex organ rearrangement. Number 4, charisma. But charisma is not a power, you say. Some people are just charming. But in the comic book world, some people are more than charming. They may have magnetic personalities or other abilities that make them appealing to others, sometimes pheromones. The thing with this ability is it puts you in a position where you have to question their interactions, like, do these people like them because they're nice? Or is it because there's some sort of influence going on? It veers pretty far into the realm of manipulation if used that way, and far away from heroic territory. And then you end up with Star Fox. Never go full Star Fox, because essentially then you've just gone Purple Man. Just let people have baseline charisma, that's fine. Average charm can feel like a superpower anyway. Number 3, power rings. Now the power ring is a fantastic weapon, and one that is immensely powerful. I mean, with it the limits are literally only one's imagination. However, sometimes the constructs can get a little silly. People creating whole trains and cars around themselves and the like. Plus, without the rings, not all the lanterns have backups, not even some extra martial arts training. Simon Baz carried a gun for a bit, but that didn't go over well. Also, a couple of issues into having it, he shot and killed Sinestro. Thankfully they were already in the realm of the undead, so it didn't have a permanent effect. But still, he would eventually be convinced he didn't need it. Kyle has some crazy constructs, because he's an artist. So the idea is that he would naturally have these really intricate designs because of his artistic nature. Okay, tell me that during a hostage situation under hostile fire. Really cool weapons, not always used to the best of their abilities. Number 2, Eye Boy. So Eye Boy is covered in eyes everywhere. You can see everything from all directions. So one would assume your brain would also be honed to accommodate this newfound skill. But also, you'd be so vulnerable. All over, so many places for people to poke. And they don't even have to come for you. You could just fall over, smushed. This, however, is a huge surveillance advantage, but you have to make sure your eye person doesn't get rushed into combat, or it could go very poorly very quickly. Now for Eye Boy, they amped up these powers, gave the poor kid a break, and he can see more than just the average human with all of these eyes. He can see things like magic and people's personalities, so it's like an extra perception on top of just having more eyes. Aura tracking, just a whole host of things to make up for what would otherwise be just being 10-eyed man but all over your body. And number 1, niceness vibes. Feel the vibe, man. This was an ability particularly highlighted by the 3rd Gold Star, who just wanted the universe to be a kind and decent place, which made him the arch enemy of Lobo, and the two would regularly get into dust-ups. Goldstar was even drawn to be the opposite of Lobo. He can encourage people to be nice because he emits niceness vibes, but they most certainly do not work on the main man. Goldstar would routinely get his butt handed to him because the writers did not like him and were just waiting for the day that he would kind of fade into obscurity, which isn't very nice. See, his vibes don't work at all.
Number 10, Martian Manhunter and Fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America, number 255. Number 9, The Flash and Being Too Fast. At first, I've got to say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of The Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8, Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which in her defense would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5. Number 7, Adam Strange and Forced Deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in mystery and space. And it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Ran's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Ranians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6. Number 6, Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe to toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story, starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1. Number 5, Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8. Number 4, Gladiator and Self-Confidence. Cal-Arc, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be. However, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and, despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1977's X-Men number 107. Number 3, Daredevil and Loud Noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted, and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises! Number 2, Green Lantern and Wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns, it's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log, and then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940's All-American Comics number 16. Number 1, Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally, or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.